This anime starts by introducing us to the protagonist, a 34-year-old hikikomori who, after months of staying home, decides to go out for the first time, only to be hit by a truck. Apparently, in the process, he saves 3 high school students who would have fared much worse if he hadn't intervened, but we don't really understand any of that, as all we see are his delusions and regrets during his last moments. Everything he didn't do, all the time he wasted, the fact that he couldn't even lose his virginity, and a series of strange words in another language he hears just before dying. Because yes, if it wasn't clear enough in the intro, our pathetic protagonist dies just minutes after arriving at the hospital, but instead of meeting St. Peter, the next thing he sees is a pair of breasts belonging to his mother, as he has literally just been reborn in a completely new world. The important thing here is that our prota remembers everything about his past life, and knows this is the perfect opportunity to start over and do everything he never could. Naturally, we don't have much action in his first months of life, but we gradually get a sense of everything around him. His new name is Rudios, given to him by his parents, Paul and Zenit. They are a young couple with little experience, so Rudios is their first child, and they have help from a mukama named Lilia. Besides, even though he's confined to his home, he begins to discover things about this new world, like they have a completely different language from anything he's heard before, basic services of an average third-world home. His father is a kind of knight, and most impressively, his mother can use some magic spells, confirming they are not in just any world, but one where magic exists. However, it wouldn't be until he turns 4 that our prota gets his first spellbook, but since he has his memories and still can't read that foreign language, it isn't until a few months later that he starts to understand what he's reading. This way, he begins to grasp the concepts of magic, like it can be invoked with spoken spells or magical circles, and most importantly, it's an innate trait in people, meaning your magical power is basically defined at birth. If you're unlucky enough to be useless, you'll likely stay that way for life, and if by some miracle you're born with talent, you'd better do everything you can to keep it. Our prota worries that, given the bad luck he had in his past life, he might be doomed to be a failure in this world too, but that's not the case, as the first time he tries, he automatically generates a small ball of water, and after a year, this happens. Of course, during this time, the kid was busy pulling buckets of water from his hands every 5 seconds, which only projected his magical power to the point where he could use magic without saying any spell. His training sessions went unnoticed by his parents, who thought he didn't even know how to read. But when he destroys the room with one of these attacks, they immediately assume their son is a magic genius, so they decide to hire a tutor to help him develop his powers. It doesn't take long for the teacher to show up at their house, and that's where we meet Roxy, who belongs to a race of blue-haired demons we'll discuss later, known for their magic and living up to 200 years. The point is, seeing how small our prota is, Roxy automatically thinks it's the typical case of delusional parents who believe their child is special or something like that. But when the lessons begin, she realizes he truly is very talented, to the point of using mid-level powers without saying a word, something almost no mage can do. That's when she starts to take the lessons a bit more seriously, and our prota learns new things, like mastering magic with other elements, better controlling his water attacks, and a bit more about how this world works. In one of the lessons, Roxy explains that there are several types of demons, including the race she belongs to. Most demons are harmless. However, Roxy tells him there is a race of demons with green hair and a red gem on their forehead, called supers, known for their brutality, and he must stay away from them at all costs. It turns out that 400 years ago, there was a great war between humans and demons called the Place War. Back then, the supers were known for killing friends and foes alike, showing no compassion for civilians, women, or even children, ravaging everything in their path and becoming a savage race even other demons despise. Somehow, the conversation shifts to the fact that she has never had a boyfriend, and our prota seizes the opportunity to throw her a few compliments, saying he'd be thrilled to be her partner. Obviously, Roxy doesn't take it very seriously, since he's a kid who doesn't even have any hair down there, but she plays along and tells him that if he's still interested in 10 years, he can give her all the compliments he wants. Thus, time continues to pass until a whole year has gone by since Roxy's arrival, and our prota has mastered several intermediate spells across various elements. His father also trained him in the art of swordsmanship, so this kid isn't even 6 yet and is already a killing machine. The point here is that, as the months go by, the day of our prota's 5th birthday arrives, which is a very special occasion in this world, as birthdays are only celebrated every 5 years, meaning at ages 5, 10, and 15, which is when a person officially becomes an adult. They have a party where his father gives him a sword, his mother a spellbook, and Roxy presents him with his first wand. Throughout all this, our prota has several flashbacks showing fragments of his past, confirming he was indeed a societal reject who didn't even attend his parents' funeral because he was too busy jerking off, but he also suffered greatly during his adolescence, which might explain why he felt the need to isolate himself from everyone, and why, even now, he feels an incredible fear of leaving his house and prefers to avoid dealing with strangers. Roxy notices this, but still encourages him to go out, claiming it's time for them to take their final exam in a more open area. With a lot of fear, Rudios agrees, and with the help of the blue-haired girl, he manages to overcome his trauma. When they arrive at the test site, she teaches him his first advanced water spell, which can cover a large area and is so destructive it nearly kills the horse. Our prota tries it too, and as expected, he gets it on the first try. So that same night, Roxy decides it's time to end the lessons, as she's taught him everything she knows, and from here on, our prota will need to find a more powerful master. Before leaving, the girl gives him a typical necklace from her demon village and tells him that if he ever plans to visit her, that necklace will help him find his way. Rudios faces his first big goodbye, not just from his teacher, but one of his first friends. However, this also marks the beginning of a new stage in his life, as thanks to Roxy, he no longer fears leaving home, and spends his afternoons exploring the area while studying and practicing with his sword. One afternoon, while walking around, our prota encounters a group of boys who are bullying and throwing stones at another, calling him a demon and telling him to go back to the demon continent. Our prota intervenes with his water magic and drives them away, approaching the other boy and realizing he has green hair but no red gem on his forehead, so he's not a demon at all, just a simple elf. With that, the two become friends, and our prota takes it upon himself to protect him from going through everything he had to endure in his past life. By the way, this broccoli head is named Sylphie, and she can also use magic, so our prota decides to teach her everything he knows. As this unfolds and the weeks go by, Rudios finds out in the most embarrassing way possible that Sylphie isn't really a boy, but a girl. Yes, she's a girl, but aside from a mini-drama from both of them, the situation doesn't escalate, and they decide to remain friends no matter what. By the end of the year, his mother announces they're expecting a second baby, which doesn't surprise our protag at all. With how often they act like rabbits, if he were a normal kid, he'd be traumatized by the nightly applause from his parents. What does surprise him, and the rest of the family, is that his mother isn't the only one expecting. Lillian, the maid, is also pregnant. Doing the math, they realize the only possible father is Paul, which he admits, confessing it's highly likely to be his. Oh, don't tell me, man. Obviously the family is in crisis, and Lillian apologizes, accepting responsibility and asking to stay and work until the baby is born. After that, she and the baby will leave, as if nothing happened. Since Paul has no say in this, the decision falls to Zenit, who, though hurt and affected by the betrayal, can't help but feel bad imagining what Lillian will face as a single mother, since no one will hire her with a baby. In light of this, our protag decides to intervene with his manipulation skills, acting sweet and telling his mother he'd like to have 2 little siblings. He insists that if anyone is to blame, it's his dad, not Lillian, so she shouldn't have to sacrifice everything she's worked for over a small mistake. He also adds that if they kick her out, Lillian and her baby could die, which is enough for Zenit to decide to forgive her and let her stay as part of the family. 9 months later, North and Aisha, our protag's little sisters, are born, easing some tension at home and giving Paul a reason to feel less useless. However, he starts feeling stuck, unable to progress with either his sword or magic, so he considers enrolling in a school in the city to break his bad streak. Sylphie doesn't take the news well and cries, begging him not to go. Our protag, obviously smitten, promises he won't leave the village without her. At that moment, Rudius receives a letter from Roxy, who mentions she's mastered some advanced magic and has spent the last 2 years living in the Shyrome Kingdom as a tutor to a rather foolish prince. She also shares some things that, honestly, don't matter to us, since the key point is that, as if reading his mind, Roxy tells him a talented boy like him should attend the Renoa Magic University, where he can learn things he couldn't on his own. With this, our protag gets the bright idea to attend university with Sylphie, so he asks his father to help pay for both their tuition, knowing Sylphie's parents can't afford it. His father thinks it over, but reminds him they're not in the same financial situation as before, so if he wants to go to university with his girlfriend, he'll have to work and earn the money himself. Rudius agrees, and the next thing we see is the arrival of Gislan, a super strong former adventure buddy of Paul, who will take him and explain the details of his new job. Before leaving, Rudius and his father have a final confrontation, where our protag tries all sorts of spells and dirty tricks to gain the upper hand. But he still can't beat his father, who hits him so hard he's left out cold, only regaining consciousness in the carriage halfway there. There, Gislane and a letter from his father explain what his job will entail. Both will be the new tutors for Eris Voyas, a distant cousin from a noble branch of his father's family. By the way, I think I never mentioned that Paul isn't just any guy. He's a highly recognized high-level warrior in the kingdom, which is why he was friends and more with Geese, one of the few real-level swordswomen. Although they aren't nobility themselves, part of the family is, and they have several important members in politics and trade. Anyway, the point is that Ghislaine will be the weapons master for the daughter of that branch of the family, while our protag will now be responsible for reinforcing certain knowledge, like reading and writing, but mainly teaching her the basics of magic. His father tells him he'll be in this job for the next 5 years, until he turns 12, and during that time, he's forbidden from returning home. By the time he finishes, he'll have enough money to do whatever he wants, and then he can decide if he wants to go to Magic University with Sylphie. His father confesses he was a bit worried they'd become too dependent on each other, so he decided this time apart would be good for them to grow individually and see if they really want to attend university together. Despite his initial displeasure, our protag agrees that this might be best for both of them. He'll earn all the money needed for university, and being alone, she can mature by learning to solve her problems on her own. With that settled, they continue their journey, and a few hours later, they arrive at the Grand Boyra's mansion, where he meets his father's cousin, Philippe, and has his first encounter with the demon incarnate on Earth, his pseudo-cousin, and the brat he'll be teaching for the next few years, Eris. The problem is that more than lessons, what she really needs is an exorcism, as she's incredibly violent and refuses to let our protag teach her, partly because she doesn't think it makes sense to take lessons from a younger boy, and also because, in her view, mastering magic isn't as useful as just learning to fight. Our protag has to find a way to convince her and earn her trust, since one thing is certain about this job: he won't get anywhere while she keeps beating him up every time she sees him. That's why he comes up with the brilliant idea of faking a kidnapping to help her escape and show her she still has much to learn. At first, everything goes according to plan, and they're locked in a basement in the city center, but things start to go south when the supposed kidnappers show up and, instead of scaring them with insults as planned, they start seriously beating Eric, almost killing her in front of our protag. This is when Rudio realizes that this fake kidnapping has turned into a very real one, so now he has to fight seriously to get out alive. The problem is that even in their situation, Eric still maintains an attitude that leaves our protag no choice but to threaten her. Either she behaves like a person for the first time in her life, or they'll both die. She agrees, and using their powers, our protag manages to get them out of the warehouse, showing how useful magic can be in situations like this. Still, in the middle of their escape, Eris gets kidnapped again. Our protag does what he can to face the bandits, but there are too many, so he has no choice but to signal Geese, who arrives instantly and saves them both from certain death. This experience makes our protag realize that no matter how talented he is, there are still countless people far stronger than him, and in this world, death literally waits around the corner. The only silver lining is that, thanks to everything that happened, Eris decides to let her guard down with our protag and accepts him as her teacher. Thus begins a new chapter in our boy's life, teaching literature, magic, and math to Eris and Gis, while the latter trains Eris and reinforces everything our protag learned from his father. Despite all the years spent in sword classes, it doesn't seem like much, as Eris undeniably surpasses him and takes the opportunity to beat him up now and then. We also meet Hilda, Eris's mother, who turns out to be just as bitter as her daughter, and her grandfather, Mr. Soros, a lover of furries and the city's leader. Our protagonist can't help but ask what the hell he's looking at, since he's never seen it before. Aegis explains that what he's seeing is the famous armored dragon king, a floating fortress belonging to Pelagius, one of the 3 legendary heroes who defeated the demon god, Laplace, during the war 400 years ago. The same war I mentioned at the start of the video involving the Suprets, which earned them their bad reputation. Well, it seems we have even more details now, as when our protagonist asks who Laplace was, Eris explains that he was a powerful demon who tried to exterminate humans, sparking a great war that nearly all races got involved in. And if I'm mentioning this, it's because, guys, it's important. But time keeps passing, and amidst the fights and study sessions, we see Eris's 10th birthday approaching, which, as is customary in this world, they plan to celebrate with a grand party and 100 important guests from the city's politics and nearby territories. Being part of the nobility, this party will also be the moment she is presented to society, so she has to make a good impression. To prepare for this, the little one starts taking dance lessons several times a week from an old lady, while our protagonist is free to do as he pleases with his time, which he uses to read more about this world and learn the beast language, because, in his mind, it sounds like a good idea to communicate with the furries. However, there's a problem. Eris is Eris, so she doesn't make it easy for the poor old lady, who ends up asking our protagonist to be her partner during lessons, since, surprisingly, he has been one of the few who can calm her down and make the redhead behave. And although our protagonist initially thinks, why should I help the brat with her dancing, he knows that if she doesn't do well, Eris could become the laughingstock of her own party, which reminds him of his past life. So he decides he has to help her have a great time, no matter the cost. What seemed like a few peaceful months for our boy quickly turned into him juggling magic, sword, dance, reading classes, learning a new language, and keeping up with his hobby of making figurines of all the girls he's met so far. In one of those moments, Rudius sells the first figurine he created, a figure of Roxy, which ironically ends up in the hands of the idiot prince, to whom she teaches magic, and who is also a bit obsessed with the blue-haired girl, though less discreetly than our protagonist. Immediately, Roxy sends him a letter saying she knows he was the creator of the figure, and she also sends him a book to learn the demon language, so if he ever decides to go to the demon continent, it will be easier to reach her village. Time keeps moving, and we go straight to the party, where the main event is Eris's dance. At first, everything was going wonderfully. The atmosphere was pleasant, the music was nice, and the little one was surprising everyone with manners worthy of a princess. She even managed to hold silly conversations with a bunch of randoms, which surprised our protagonist, knowing that if it were up to her, she would have kicked them out of the castle for being too boring. However, everything goes perfectly, at least until the dancing starts. Because in her first dance with a random guy, he can't keep up with her pace since Eris is too fast, and they end up making fools of themselves. The girl feels humiliated, and it seemed like everything had gone to hell until our boy steps in and invites her to dance. Eris doesn't seem very sure she can go on after that humiliation, but our protagonist reassures her, saying he cast a spell on her to dance better, ensuring everything would go perfectly. Thanks to this, Eris manages to give an incredible performance, and our protagonist chuckles to himself, knowing there was never any spell, but she needed that extra boost of confidence. In the end, the party turned out wonderfully, and Rudios even caught the attention of some girls, but Eris made sure to get them off his back, as she has slowly been falling for him too. Later, our protagonist gifts his students their first magic wands, while Gis gives Eris a ring from her beast clan, a kind of talisman passed down through generations that protects during the night and prevents surprise attacks. By morning, our protagonist realizes that Eris accidentally fell asleep in his bed, but he decides not to disturb her and simply goes out to explore the mansion. In that moment, he finds the old Saurus doing some questionable things with a furry, and more importantly, they both notice a kind of dark sphere high in the sky. From his expression, it's clear Saurus has an idea of what it might be, but he doesn't say a word. However, from here on, things start to get murky little by little, as even though people's lives continue normally, the presence of that sphere seems to foreshadow tough times ahead, making everyone increasingly nervous. Still, no one seems to know what it is, or at least, they don't mention it out loud. So even though he's curious, our protagonist decides not to dwell on it too much and just continue with his daily life. The routine of our kids resumes and stays that way for a whole year until our protagonist's 10th birthday approaches, and Eris, with her parents' help, starts organizing a small surprise party, which our protagonist ends up discovering on the first day they start planning it. This also brings up a topic I hadn't mentioned before about the family branches and how odd they all are about it. You see, they all belong to the Grey Rat clan, which is a huge family that spans the entire kingdom, with several main branches and some secondary ones. Eri, her father, and her grandfather belong to the Voria's Grey Rat branch, one of the main and most politically powerful ones, while our protagonist and his father are from the Notos Grey Rat branch, which is supposedly a secondary branch. But upon further investigation, our protagonist learns that the Notos are actually one of the main families, and Paul's brother, his uncle, is the leader of that branch. This shouldn't matter much, as Paul may have chosen to stay away from any political conflict, but it turns out that since our protagonist arrived at this house, the Boreas have kept the secret of his presence, and apparently, they can't disclose much about him, as they've been fighting over the grandfather's lands for a while, and our protagonist's presence could lead to big misunderstandings. But despite all that, the Boreas decide to throw him a small private party for his birthday, and our protagonist takes the chance to play with them, pretending to cry to see their reactions. So he realizes that, even though they aren't very close, even the old man has grown quite fond of him, to the point of threatening to start a war against the Notos if anything were to happen to our boy. Eris tells our protagonist she has a big surprise for him, and he immediately asks if his family came, but Eris says they were invited, but they couldn't come because, for the past few months, the area where they live has been infested with monsters, and Paul is in charge of protecting everyone in the village. This makes Eris's mother a bit emotional, and she hugs our boy, showing that, contrary to what he thought, the busty woman doesn't hate him, but has been holding back to maintain her pride. On the contrary, the older redhead has also grown quite fond of him, to the point of saying he's now part of the family and can marry Eris if he wants. The little one blushes, though it's clear she doesn't dislike the idea, and she gives him a gift from everyone, a large, incredibly powerful magic scepter that will help cast advanced spells more easily. The party goes wonderfully, and that night, Eris's father tells her they have 2 older sons, but they were sent to study and train with the most powerful branch of the Grey Rats, almost at the same time our protagonist arrived at the house. That's why, at first, everyone was quite reluctant to accept him, as it seemed unfair to have a boy living with them while their own sons were sent far away. But now, thanks to him, things have become more bearable, and he has proven to be a boy worthy of being a Grey Rat. Thinking about what his wife said during the party and seeing his daughter's reaction, Philippe asks Rudius if he's willing to marry Eris, but our boy isn't sure how to respond. In the end, the old man tells him that, either way, there's no rush, as they are still very young, but he should know they have their blessing to move forward with his daughter, if that's what they both want. Eris is eager to get close to our guy, and that night she shows up in her favorite panties. He accepts her intentions, and it seemed like it would be the night they finally got intimate, but she decides to wait. If he still wants it when she turns 15, they can do whatever they want then. Meanwhile, we cut to our boy's house, where Paul and his adventurer group are facing some monsters that keep coming. They all try to figure out where the monsters are coming from, but they can't find anything, even though all signs point to the sphere that appeared in the sky over a year ago, along with the monster invasion affecting not just this town, but the entire region. Still, things at his family's house seem to be going normally. His little sisters have grown, Sylphie is getting stronger with magic, and she even sends him a typical elven pendant for his birthday. However, this is where things start to go downhill fast, as the strange sphere in the sky begins to grow at an alarming rate, turning the clouds red and making it look like something terrible is about to happen. Everyone is worried, but again, they have no idea what to expect, though some people have started to move. This is where we meet Orsted, the Dragon King, who senses a huge amount of mana building up somewhere on the continent. Kishirika, the great demon empress, assumes that an unknown person has cast an incredibly powerful spell to cause all this chaos. We also see Paragus himself, who believes everything happening is because someone is trying to break the seal on the Demon King, and he sends Monfi, one of his subordinates, to investigate the source. All good, right? Well, not really. It turns out that, by sheer coincidence, our Prota, Geese, and Eris were practicing with the new scepter right where the mana from the sphere was accumulating. For them, seeing the sphere acting weird had become relatively normal, so they didn't pay much attention when strange whirlwinds started forming in the sky. The real trouble began with the arrival of Almanfi, who was drawn to the area by the commotion. Seeing our kids doing strange things, he attacked them, thinking they were somehow responsible for everything. Geese defends our Prota, but the guy is too strong and nearly kills them. However, Geese manages to calm him down by explaining they have nothing to do with it, and it seemed like it would end there, but it didn't. Out of nowhere, the sphere in the sky implodes, and the seals around it explode, sending energy beams spreading across various areas of the human continent. Our kids are hit by one of those beams and, from what we can see, they die. But don't think it ends here, as our Prota wakes up in his old body in a blank space, which he assumes is the limbo between life and death. There, he meets a faceless man who introduces himself as a god and reveals that he wasn't responsible for sending him to this world. He has been enjoying watching how our Prota has been managing his new life, and right now, he hasn't died, but was affected by a strange event caused by the explosion of the red sphere. Our Prota isn't sure if he can trust this guy, but the god says he just wants to help him survive what's coming, as that explosion made things 1,000 times more complicated. The god tells him that, at this rate, both of them might die, so he gives him a hint on how to survive from now on. He explains that when he wakes up, he'll meet a man who will be key to getting them back home, so he advises him to trust him, help him, and stick by his side no matter what. With that, the god says goodbye, and our Prota wakes up next to Eris by a campfire with a green-haired man and a red gem on his forehead, a super the demon race Roxy warned him to stay away from long ago. Instinctively, Rudius grabs his staff to defend himself and attack the demon, but remembering what the god said, he lowers his weapon and uses what he learned from Roxy's book to communicate in the demon language. The demon introduces himself as Ruger Supertia, confirming he's indeed a super, but unlike what our Prota and everyone thinks, he's not violent and doesn't want to kill them. He was just passing by when Rudius and Eris fell from the sky, so he decided to protect them as it's his duty since he found them. Ruger asks how they ended up there, and our Prota explains the situation, to which the green-haired man offers to accompany and protect them all the way back home. Rudios agrees but is unsure why someone would offer to take a months-long journey for mere strangers. Ruger simply tells him that kids like them wouldn't survive a week on their own in the demon continent, and letting them go alone would further ruin his race's reputation. At that moment, Eric wakes up just as he sees the super, but calms down once he realizes the guy is just a big friendly dude willing to help. Here, the kids also wonder if there happens to be a beast woman around, but Ruger tells them it's just the two of them, and this is a very open area, so he would have noticed if a woman had come with them. The next day, the trio decides to start this new adventure toward the human continent, crossing a good stretch of desert until they reach a small demon village known as the Migro. There, Ruiger asks the guy at the door to let them in for a night to rest and plan their trip better, but the guy says they look too suspicious and should continue on their way unless they want trouble. Ruiger insists, and the guy agrees to call the village leader. This is where our Prota realizes that the leader wears the same necklace Roxy gave him before leaving, meaning he's in nothing less than his master's hometown. Not only that, but the guy at the door is his father, though he looks so young since he's from a race that can live over 200 years. The point here is that once the situation is clarified, the kids have a meeting with the leader where they explain everything that happened, and Ruiger promises to get them to the human continent safe and sound. The leader of the Migrut asks why he's so determined to help human kids, and this is where Ruiger reveals that part of his life's goal is to show people that supers aren't bad, and to gradually clear the horrible reputation that has tormented his kind for years. A reputation based on pure lies. As we know, the hatred toward supers began 400 years ago during the war when all demon races united in one army to fight alongside the demon god, the Place, who was responsible for giving demons the same rights as humans. The problem is that the Place's goals gradually became distorted, and during one of the battles, the supers, already known as a warrior race, went berserk and began attacking enemies and allies indiscriminately. However, while all this did happen, the detail is that the supers didn't do it willingly. They were tricked by the Place, who gave them cursed spears that made them go berserk, attacking anything in their path, even their own families. Little by little, the supers came to their senses. But it was too late. They had destroyed everything they cared about. And the worst part is, they remembered every detail. Rui was one of those supers. Yes, he's about 500 years old, and that's why he's now looking for any chance to change his race's future and reputation. Our protagonist hears his story and promises to help him achieve his goal, so now they must push forward at all costs. However, to reach the human continent and improve the super's reputation, they'll need some money. So the next day, they leave the village with supplies and head to the nearest city to start working in the Adventurers Guild. The problem is that supers are banned from entering all cities, even within the demon continent, so the kids dye Rui's hair to pass him off as a mid-group and work without issues. The plan goes as expected, and they register in the Adventurers Guild under the name Dead End, a nickname Rui was known by in his days as a dismantler, but since he's a new man now, the kids will use it for a different meaning. Everyone in the guild mocks them, as they just look like a couple of kids and a grown migrout who just arrived, but the kids decide to take it easy and gradually tackle basic missions. That night, our protagonist receives another visit from God, who tells him everything is going great, and that the next step is to accept a mission to rescue a cat. Rudius doesn't understand how such a basic mission can help them move toward their goal, but he doesn't question it much and simply accepts. The next day, the three set out to complete the mission, which progresses quickly thanks to the gem Rui has on his forehead, which is actually a third eye that can see the mana of all creatures and track them based on it. This is how they find the cat trapped in a cave and realize it was kidnapped by a criminal group that steals pets, waits for their families to start searching, and collects the reward. The criminals show up at that moment, and our protagonist captures them, trying to reach an agreement so they won't have to report them, and everything ends well for both sides. However, the leader of the criminals manages to break free and attacks our protagonist, prompting Ruiger to act quickly and coldly, killing him on the spot. Our protagonist is shocked, as he has never killed anyone, and he knows that resorting to murder was unnecessary in this situation. But for Ruiger, the mere fact that someone attacks a child is enough to deserve death. Our protagonist tells him that acting this way will only worsen the reputation of the supers, but it's clear that Rui's moral compass is a bit off. Rudius doesn't know what to think about it, so he simply focuses on ending the conflict, reaching an agreement with the other two criminals to help them get good missions to earn some money in exchange for not turning them in to the authorities. Of course, Ruiger disagrees. As to him, these guys are villains, and he doesn't want to depend on people who, in his eyes, should be dead. At that moment, Eris tells him the truth, saying that he has done bad things too, and that doesn't mean he deserves death. We all do bad things from time to time, and what's important is not just paying for our sins, but having a chance to prove we can be better. Thanks to this, Rui agrees, and the kids start working alongside the pet kidnappers to earn some money. The plan is that, since the kidnappers have a higher rank within the Adventurers clan, they can access better-paying missions, which they will carry out alongside our kids so they can level up more easily. However, the conflict between Ruiger's and our protagonist's morals doesn't end, to the point where Rudius starts to question whether Ruiger can truly be considered a good person and if it's worth continuing the journey with him. Meanwhile, we return to the human continent, where we see that our protagonists weren't the only ones affected by the disaster, and in fact, 1,000 people are missing, including some members of Eris's family and our protagonist's family. Upon learning what happened, Roxy springs into action, arriving at a refugee camp where she starts reading the records to ensure that Rudius and his family are not dead. After seeing they weren't on the list of deceased, Roxy finds a letter from Paul where he tries to reach out to our protagonist, informing him that his mother, Lilia, and Aisha are missing. Fortunately, Paul managed to find little Norm, so now they are together, trying to locate the rest of the family. However, she won't be alone, as she meets two of Paul's former adventure companions, a dwarf and an elf, who decide to join her to help their old friend. Back with our kids, they will participate in their first big mission, which consists of taking down a very powerful beast in the Dark Territory. Here, Rudius and Ruiger have even more conflicts, as by overthinking things, our protagonist prevented Ruger from intervening to save a group of rookie kids who were also in the area. According to our protagonist, they had to let them fight their own battles, but because of that, one of the kids ended up dead, causing Ruger to explode, accusing our protagonist that because of his attitude, someone who truly didn't deserve it has now died. Despite their differences, they successfully complete the mission, but upon returning to the guild, they are confronted by a horse-headed demon who discovered their trick and threatened to report them to have their adventurer licenses revoked. Our protagonist didn't know what to do and was about to panic, but this time, Ruiger intervenes, revealing his true hair color, showing that he is indeed a super, and confronting the horse, while telling him that they have their own reasons for doing what they're doing, and unless he wants to die, it would be best for him to stay quiet and not get in their way. The horse agrees, although he ends up fainting, but Ruiger's revelation causes everyone around him to realize he is a super, and even the kids they saved earlier start to fear him. Ruiger flees, knowing that at this rate, they will have no choice but to leave the city. But none of that matters, as he and our protagonist finally have the chance to clear up the misunderstandings that have been brewing between them, realizing they have more in common than they thought, and that, in their own ways, they are both just doing everything they can to help each other. So, the next day, Rui shaves his head, covers his third eye, and they set off to continue this adventure that has just begun. After this, we have a time jump of a whole year, in which the kids have finally reached the coast of the Demon Continent, where now, the only thing left to reach the Millis Continent, the land of humans, is to take a boat. The problem is that, over these months, the Dead End group has gained a reputation for being very strong and powerful, but also for having a super among their members, which means they have to pay an absurd amount that exceeds 1,000 times everything they have been able to save during this year. The good side is that, in these areas, many people know Rui is a super, and they no longer see him as a monster from their worst nightmares, but they will still need money if they want to travel together. However, given such a large amount, it's clear that no matter how many important jobs they do, they won't be able to gather it through traditional means, so they have no choice but to wait for a miracle, or, in our protagonist's case, new advice from God. Fortunately, that same night, God communicates with him to say he has been enjoying everything they've done this year and to give him new advice to help him out of this. Tomorrow, first thing, he must buy food from a street vendor and walk through a dark alley. Rudius asks what will happen if he does, but God tells him that will be a surprise. So, even though it sounds crazy, our protagonist knows they don't have many options right now, so he agrees, and that same morning he starts wandering the streets following his advice. Meanwhile, Ruiger and Eris stay behind to train, but something strange happens. Ruiger notices someone watching them, and that someone is Roxy. That's right, folks, our heroes aren't the only ones making progress. While they arrived at the port city to leave the continent, Roxy and her team were just arriving to find our protag and other missing people. During her investigation, Roxy heard about a group with 2 human kids, but when she investigates, she only sees Eris, whom she doesn't know, and Ruiger, a super, which scares her off as she continues searching throughout the city. The frustrating part is that while she's searching the streets for our protag, Rudius is looking for his miracle, so they never cross paths despite being just a few meters apart. Speaking of our protag, he followed the Godman's advice and bought a bunch of food from one of the street vendors. After that, he wandered through the most dangerous alleys until he found the hungriest, dirtiest, and most dying person in the city, and he couldn't help but offer all the food he had bought. And here, folks, is where the miracle happens, because that beggar turned out to be none other than Kisharika, the great demon empress. Upon seeing her, our protag thinks she's either a crazy person with severe schizophrenia or a very creative girl, so he just goes along with it, kneeling before her and saying it's an honor to meet her. The crazy lady keeps talking about being a demon empress until she tells our boy that as a reward for feeding her and saving her life, she'll grant him a wish. Hearing this, the protag immediately asks for a ton of money, but unfortunately, Kishirika is broke, just like him. Because of this, he asks for half the world. However, she assures him that she hasn't even conquered the world yet to give him half. Faced with this situation, Rudio shook out his last option. He decided to satisfy his most impure thoughts, and like a good pervert, he said he wished to have her body. To his surprise, the demon empress began to take off her clothes in front of him, but before our boy could appreciate it, she put her clothes back on, saying that unfortunately, she can't fulfill his wish because she already has a fiancé. Therefore, she tells him that her gift for saving her life will be demon eyes, which, of course, our boy has no idea what they're for. Then, in a somewhat abrupt manner, Kishirika lunged at the protag and applied a demon eye using her hands. And although Rudius doesn't know it yet, this will be very important in the future, as it's the eye of divination. Later, we see that after using the demon eye without realizing it, our boy returned to his friends to tell them what happened. Thanks to this, he discovered that Ruiger knows the story of the demon empress. We then find out that it took the protag a few weeks to get used to his new eye, and boy did he get used to it well, because even though he can only see 1 to 2 seconds into the future, it was enough to defeat Eris in a practice fight. However, such humiliation left the redhead very embarrassed, and she furiously went home after her defeat. A few hours later, we see Rudius trying to sneak out at night to sell the staff Eris gave him, as it was the only option he could think of to get the money needed to travel with his friends. But before he could do that, he was intercepted by Ruiger, who, after a long conversation, confessed that his pride wouldn't let him see how he planned to sell a valuable gift just to continue their journey. Faced with this situation, they agreed to look for some smugglers to help them with this matter, even though Ruiger doesn't believe it's morally right. However, to continue the journey, he's willing to sacrifice his values. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by Gallius Kriener, a guy who was looking for the protag to thank him for saving his life a few hours earlier. Remember I told you that Rudius used his eye by accident? Well, it was to save this guy with a strange aura. The next day, we see that after a long journey, Rock arrived in the city with his companions, aiming to find Paul's family. While in his free time, he investigates the group called Dead M, which, by pure coincidence, he found training on the beach. However, when he was about to spy on them for a while, Ruger noticed his presence, so terrified that the group's super would attack her, she began to run desperately toward her hideout. Unfortunately, when she arrived, she found an unpleasant situation, as her somewhat promiscuous companion, named Ellen Alice, was satisfying her most carnal desires with several men. Because of this, horrified by the situation, she used magic to throw them out of the hideout. As expected, the repair of the place cost a lot of money. Faced with this situation, they made a shoddy arrangement, and the whole group fled to the next town. Meanwhile, hours later, we see how, with Galuz's help, our boy and his group managed to transport Ruiger at a low cost, although in return, he had no choice but to agree to release some cargo upon arriving at the Saint Port. During the journey, our boy imagines the ideal travel scenario, which includes shipwrecking and ending up on a deserted island with his beloved. Unfortunately, none of that happened, as the harsh reality is that Eris suffered through the longboat ride due to seasickness. Still, this didn't stop our little pervert from giving himself a bit of affection, taking advantage of his friend's vulnerability. Finally, after arriving at the Millis continent, the protag decided to leave Eris in a safe place and set off in search of Rui, who was in the secret hideout of Gallus's smuggler partners. A place that, by the way, is not pleasant for a guy like Rudius, since, as you can imagine, smugglers do their work with anything, including exotic animals and people. Still, the protag had to act oblivious and pretend nothing was happening around him until he found Rudius, who told him that there were 6 beast girls being held captive there, although one was killed for crying too loudly. Therefore, sticking to Gallus's plan, they assume that these beast girls are the cargo their contact ordered them to free. However, with too many guards around, Rui warns the protag that they'll have to kill them all. Although aware that our boy isn't a fan of doing that, he assures him that his hands won't get stained with blood because he'll take care of everything. Next, As promised, Ruiger took care of the cruel guards, while Rudriosi helped the girls with their wounds. After finishing, Ruger and our boy sneaked away with the girls to the nearest city. But before they got too far, they remembered there was an exotic dog imprisoned there, so Rudios had to return to save it. However, this was a terrible decision, not because of the adorable puppy he saved, but because, when he least expected it, two powerful beastmen ambushed him. In this situation, after failing to dodge their attacks, Rudios was captured. Now, he is under the control of the beastmen, who, very angry and following their leader's orders, took him to their village to be judged for his crimes. Later, we see Rudius in the beastmen's prison, and although he doesn't mind the place, he knows he must escape as soon as possible. Unfortunately, no matter how easy it would be to use magic to unlock the door and leave, he fears that doing so would leave him lost in the vast jungle outside. Given this situation, our boy decided to wait for his friends to come rescue him. In the meantime, he took the chance to observe the villagers, especially the voluptuous beast women. However, after a few days in jail, Rudius began to worry that his friends seemed to have abandoned him. During this time, he met Gessa, a cheating gambler who quickly became his servant, and with whom he also experienced one of the tensest moments of his life, as the Dolditas village suddenly caught fire. Therefore, the protagonist used his skills to create a key, which he used to open his cell. Next, with Gessa, he ran to the village to see what was happening. To their surprise, the attackers were the same smugglers who had been stealing the village's girls. Because of this, Rudy, enraged by their actions, decided to help the beastmen so they would owe him a favor. Then, he created rain to put out the village fire, which allowed the guy who captured him to regain his sense of smell. This way, he took care of the bandits threatening the protagonist's life. Later, promising to have a private talk afterward, he asked for his help to rescue the kidnapped girls. To Rudios' surprise, he discovered that the mastermind behind the attack was Galus, who, after injuring the powerful beast warrior allied with the protagonist, confessed that he is someone with a great reputation, known as the Saint of the North, Galus the Cleaner. As could be expected after seeing Galus's immense strength, the protagonist began to debate whether it was worth risking his life for girls he didn't even know. But despite his initial decision to let his enemy escape, he quickly changed his mind when the sacred beast of the Doldias attacked Galus. Thus, we see a fierce duel between our boy and the smuggler leader, who, despite managing to injure the protagonist, ended up badly hurt by Rudios' powerful magic, leaving him exhausted from using all his power. The next day, our boy opened his eyes and found many waiting for him to wake up, including his dear friends. Then, Guise, very embarrassed, apologized for mistaking him for a smuggler. Following him, both the prison guard and Gustav, the village chief, apologized and thanked our boy for his help. As expected, their words made the protagonist very happy, assuring Eric that it would be a great story to tell his grandfather. Unfortunately, while they were off on adventures, Saurus Voria Greyrat, the supreme chief of Fitoa and Eris's grandfather, was unjustly sentenced to death by his own right-hand man, an ambitious guy named Darius. Back with our protagonist, we see that, along with his companions, he spent several days in the Beastmen's tribe. There, during one of the many dinners they had with them, they discovered that both Gustav and Guise knew their friend Giseline, as they are her father and brother respectively. Sadly, neither of them remembers her fondly, believing she died after leaving her duty to protect the forest and the sacred beast. Therefore, as you can imagine, Guise, in particular, feels a deep disdain for her sister, considering her a disgrace to their people. In the end, these memories enraged the powerful warrior, who took his daughter Minitoma from Eris's arms and left without saying goodbye. Eris, very angry at this behavior, followed him without hesitation because, after all, Gislan is her teacher, especially when she saw that his frustration was hurting Minitona. Then, in tears, she questioned why he considers her teacher a disgrace, because, contrary to what he thinks, she is amazing and very helpful, always coming to her rescue when needed. Our boy, seeing his friend overwhelmed with emotions, approached to give her a hug and reminded her that the Gislin they know is not the same as the one the Doldia tribe knew. However, Gil, surprised to discover that his sister had become an admirable person, asked if that was true. In response to this question, Rudios revealed that he couldn't confirm it, but he could say that, at the very least, she is a person worthy of respect. The next day, we see that both Minotona and Third, another little girl from the village, are very interested in Ghislaine's story, so Eris, very excited, tells them how she taught her everything she knows about the sword. As expected, her words caught the girl's attention, especially Minotona, who begged her to teach her to use the sword like her aunt did. Clearly, Eris couldn't refuse such a request, and decided to show her what she could do with a wooden sword training session. Meanwhile, from a distance, Rudios and Gies watched the practice. Here, the powerful warrior confessed to the protagonist that his daughter had never wanted to learn to use the sword, no matter how much he insisted, so he was very surprised that Eris managed to convince her with just a few words. And just like that, in the blink of an eye, 3 months passed. Therefore, we see how much Minotoma has progressed in her sword skills, which fills Eris with pride. But suddenly, all the joy in the place vanished in an instant, when Eris revealed to her student that she would soon have to leave the village, specifically when the rainy season ends. These words enraged Minotona, who wished for her to stay forever in the village, and as one would expect from a beast, the little girl had no better idea than to solve the matter with her fists. So, Tersena quickly informed the others about what was happening, and they all rushed to separate the girls. However, hours later, Gies spoke to his daughter about how much he misses her sister and regrets not helping her when she needed it, due to his selfishness. His words softened Minotona's heart, and opened her eyes to how wrong she was to be so selfish. Because of this, she and Tersena visited Eris that night. Thanks to this, the girls were able to spend their last night together with joy and peace. The next day, we see Rudios and his friends setting off for their next adventure in Millie's, after saying goodbye to their new friends, who admire them and wish them luck on their journey. After a long journey across the continent, our group arrived in Milleshium, the capital of Millie's. There, Rudius proposed a strategic meeting for Team Dead M, because after a year in the Demon Continent, they have finally returned to human territory. He confesses to his teammates that, even though they really want to catch up with Azura, he thinks the best choice for the team is to stay in the capital for a while to earn some money, especially since they have no idea how much their next boat trip will cost. Next, Rudio presented the first part of his plan to earn money, which involves improving Ruiger's reputation as a hero. To do this, they will help people and then reveal the bald guy's true identity while giving him a statue that will serve as a charm. Just so you know, these are made by our guy, and after 3 long months with nothing to do in Doldia, he learned how to carve statues. And even though they weren't completely on board, his teammates agreed to follow his plan. Because of this, Rudy gave them the next day off, as he planned to focus on mass-producing Ruiger's figures. Unfortunately for our guy, while trying to think of the right words to write a letter to Paul, he saw someone being kidnapped out his window. In this situation, and despite having been unjustly imprisoned not long ago, he decided to help the person in trouble. As expected, it wasn't too hard for him to infiltrate the kidnapper's base. However, his stealth plan went out the window when he accidentally found some used panties and let out a scream of excitement. So now that our little pervert was discovered, he had the bright idea to wear the panties on his face like a mask, and while yelling Ruiger the hero, he took down the kidnappers. However, he was quite surprised to discover that the leader of the gang was his father, who, if you ask me, seems to have quite a few issues with alcohol. Next, we see his father, very embarrassed, inviting him for tea because he is very interested in knowing what the hell he was doing during the 1.5 years since the disaster in Roa. But even though Rudios thinks his adventures were fascinating, his father doesn't agree, and scolds him for wasting so much valuable time on pointless adventures. Then, a bit annoyed, he asks why he didn't use his time in the Demon Continent to find out about the other victims of the disaster. The protagonist, ashamed for only thinking of himself, admits that it simply never occurred to him. In the end, as expected, the guy with obvious alcoholism issues tried to put on his moral suit and continued scolding our guy for not having his priorities straight. This led to both of them ending up in a fight until, after a while, they were interrupted by Norm, the protagonist's little sister, who doesn't even remember him and just wants them to stop bothering their father. The situation broke Rudios' heart, especially when he realized everyone was looking at him with disdain. For this reason, he decided to leave and pretend this never happened. But before he could leave, his father revealed that he wasn't the only one who was teleported, as everyone in Aldea Buena was a victim of the disaster. He also mentioned that he left a message at the Adventurers Guild in Puerto San and scolded him for not reading it. He also assured him that many people died while he was off on his fantasy journey. Upon hearing this, Rudy scolded himself for never thinking about the disaster and assuming Aldea Buena was fine. Then, he asked his father if Sylphie had disappeared too. Paul, furious with his son, questioned whether he really cares more about knowing about his girlfriend than his own mother. This way, our guy finally discovered that his mother had also disappeared. And not only her, but there were no traces of Lilia or Aisha either. Moreover, his father, on the verge of tears, revealed that this is why he created the search and rescue squad that he can see around him. Clearly, Rudius, a bit confused, asked why such a squad is kidnapping people. Paul revealed that the only reason for doing so is that some have been enslaved. His words reminded the protagonist that the boy he tried to save a few hours ago was actually one of the kids who bothered his Sylphie. Finally, our guy's father confessed that he deeply regrets that during this time he only went on adventures without caring at all about the disaster victims. Next, we see Rudius returning home and trying to cheer himself up by saying this isn't the first time he's fought with his father, and that just a talk will ease the situation. Although deep down, he knows things won't be that easy, and even his own body tells him so by making him feel nauseous just thinking about it. Later, his friends returned home and were surprised to see him so sad, engulfed in darkness. As expected, Eris, upon discovering that it's all Paul's fault, instantly got furious and decided to go kill him. But Ruiger, being more emotionally responsible, stopped her and warned her not to get involved in family troubles. Instead, he suggested she try to comfort our guy, and even though she's not very good at it, she made a great effort to sit next to Rudius just to give him a hug to make him feel better. Next, we briefly flash back to see why Paul is so demanding of his son, as we can see that after the tragedy in Aldea Buena, when he opened his eyes, he was only with little Norm. Because of this, still not understanding what had happened, he acted like a good father, and, no matter how tough things got, he set out to take his daughter home. Unfortunately, upon arrival, they found there was no home to return to. Faced with such disaster, Paul had to hold back tears and get to work organizing a search and rescue team for the missing people from Aldea Buena. Thus, for a year, he put aside the search for his own family to help the other volunteers. As you can imagine, not finding his loved ones only deepened his pain and disappointment, leading him to drink heavily to forget his sorrows. Still, he never stopped being a good father to Norm, who admired her strong dad. Back in the present, we see Gessa, the friend Rudius made in Doldias, is also a loyal ally of Paul, asking him to visit the guild the next day, sure he'll meet someone interesting. However, sensing Gessa was referring to his son, Paul made such an obvious face of disdain that Gessa noticed something was wrong with his friend. So, over several drinks discussing Paul's feelings for his son, Gessa finally assured him he expects too much from an 11-year-old, since even they wouldn't have survived in the demon continent at that age. Paul indicated that he partly agreed, but felt it wasn't wrong to demand a lot from someone so talented, but Gessa told him he was very mistaken, as he had never set foot on the demon continent, a desolate place that burns by day and freezes at night. A place where, to get a simple piece of firewood, you have to kill a monster, where there's not even water if you're thirsty, because it doesn't rain. And after much talk, he assured Paul that his point was that a child experiencing their first adventure in such a place would naturally lose focus on what's important, especially since he had to keep an eye on a girl he loves. Furious, Paul told him that if things were as tough as he believed, he didn't understand why Rudius looked so happy telling him about his adventure. Gessi replied it was simply to avoid worrying him, knowing full well he has a useless father. His words upset Paul, who, after thinking for a moment, realized his friend was right, and that he should just be happy to see his little son again. The next day, our boy's father decided to visit him sober. As expected, Eric didn't welcome him very well, and even wanted to punch him, but Ruiho didn't intervene in time for the protagonist to have a moment alone with his father. After an awkward chat, they both understood they did their best in their first meeting after so long. After apologizing, Rudius suggested they pretend their fight never happened and asked Paul to crouch down while opening his arms. Then, our boy jumped into his arms, confessing how much he missed him. This made Paul burst into tears as he hugged his little Rudy, revealing he missed him a lot too, even opening his heart about the pain of not finding any family for so long, which made him believe they all had died. Later, Rudy met up with his friends, revealing that their plans had changed because his father gave him money and a letter of introduction. Thanks to this, they could more easily cross to the central continent. However, he warned Iris that it's highly likely their home no longer exists, as both Lord Phillips and Lord Soros have disappeared, and even Ghislaine's whereabouts are still unknown. Despite the protagonist feeling very sad to deliver this news, she assured him she was prepared for things to be this way. Finally, the dead-end group agreed to leave the capital of Miley's the next day after the protagonist could say goodbye to his little sister, Norm, and his father. Meanwhile, as Ruddy approached the central continent, we see Roxy decided to visit her hometown after discussing how important family is with her friend. However, just like when she left, she found only overwhelming silence around her, as everyone there communicates telepathically and she can't use it. Suddenly, she saw a little boy get hurt while playing with his friends, so without hesitation, she used her healing magic on him. Although for a brief moment she felt something change, reality hit her when the kids tried to use telepathy to thank her. Because of this, Roxy ran away from the place and then visited her old home. There, her father, Rowan, warmly welcomed her and even invited her to spend some time with him. And even though she considered the offer for a moment, seeing how Robin used telepathy to talk to his wife, Rakari, she decided that it would be best to decline his proposal and leave the village as soon as possible. Clearly, Robin and Rakari pleaded with her to stay for at least a few hours. Unfortunately, Roxy had already made her decision and lied that she only stopped by to say hello during her important mission. Her father, somewhat saddened, asked when she would return, to which she, with a cold look, replied that maybe she would never come back. Hearing this, her mother approached her, asking her to visit at least once every 20 years, because she would always be welcome in their home. And although Roxy promised she might return in 50 years, Rakari broke down in tears because it made her happy to hear that promise. This situation caused memories to flood her daughter's mind, recalling how badly she felt as a child, always believing she was a bad girl because no one spoke to her, even thinking her parents were distressed because of her. However, Roxy is very mistaken because, despite worrying about her, they never wanted to abandon her, as no matter her condition, she will always be their beloved daughter. Finally, seeing her mother's tears, Roxy understood how much they loved her. Because of this, overwhelmed with tears, she hugged her mother, apologizing for leaving home without telling them. Next, we see Roxy spending the night at her parents' house, although the next day she reveals she must leave because she is searching for her lost apprentice. Rowan, hearing this, tells her that about 2 years ago, an adorable young boy named Rudius visited them and mentioned he was her apprentice, so now he wonders if he has finally made it home. As expected, this information surprised the protagonist's teacher, who ended up fainting while trying to process everything her parents told her. Later, Roxy returned with her companions, and they set off on a journey north across the Demon Continent to find Zenit, Lilia, or Aisha, because now that she knows Rudius is okay, her motivation to find the rest of her family has renewed. Meanwhile, our boy met again with the God-Man, though this time he acted differently toward him, as after thanking him for making him who he is today, he begged for advice on finding his family members. Then he has to send a letter to someone at the Sharon Palace. Finally, he assures him that if he follows his advice closely, he'll have the chance to reunite with both Lilia and Aisha. A few hours later, we see that after a tiring boat trip, Rudios and his friends reach the central continent, quickly heading to the capital of the Sharon Kingdom, a massive city, which means finding Lilia and Aisha will be extremely difficult for Rudios. So, without thinking too much, he asked his friends for help to gather some information. Later, the protagonist wrote the letter just as the god told him. Then he went in search of the place he saw in his dreams, wondering why the soldiers would have arrested Aisha. Suddenly, he noticed someone was following him closely, and fearing someone wanted to harm him, he started sneaking through the city and even created a rock wall to prevent his pursuer from following him. However, in doing so, he realized he made a terrible mistake, as on the other side, he heard the same girl who fled during his dream where he spoke with a god. Therefore, he immediately asked the palace guards what the heck they were doing. They, a bit embarrassed for attacking a girl, tried to explain the situation, but since they didn't give a good answer, the protagonist decided to save the girl and cast a spell on the guards, who, worried about the attack, alerted their comrades. Unfortunately for them, Rudius is a very smart guy, as before they could surround him, he used one of those spells to fly away. Minutes later, we see Aisha appear before the protagonist and thank him for saving her. Then, she asks for help to send a letter to her father to inform him that her mother is imprisoned in the castle. Clearly, Rudius didn't even think about refusing to help, assuring her that he would rescue her mother himself. However, first he took Aisha to his hideout, where he explained the situation to his friends and asked for their help. They, without hesitation, told him it was time to attack the castle, but seeing her excitement, Rudius asked her to calm down because they first needed to hear what Roxy thinks, as he believes his teacher is in the castle, since the last information he had about her was that she was a teacher for one of the princes. The next day, we see Roxy send Ginger to the protagonist's home to take him to the palace. As expected, Ruddy was very excited to learn that his teacher wanted to see him. For that reason, he got ready in seconds and accompanied Ginger. Unfortunately for him, he was led into a trap, as upon entering the room where Roxy was supposed to be, he was stunned to find Lilia tied up. But as if that wasn't enough, the guy named Pax Chiron, who set the trap, made him fall into a king-like barrier to prevent him from using his magic. He then revealed that he captured him to use him as bait to lure Roxy, as he desperately wants to turn her into his personal sex slave, and even told him that the first thing he would do when he sees her is abuse her in front of him and then cut off her head. However, Rudius assured him there was a small flaw in his plan, as no one knows that both he and Lilia are his prisoners, meaning Roxy will never know he captured them. But Pax, trusting Roxy's intelligence, said that's not a problem because she is smart and will find out somehow. Our boy pointed out that the only way for her to know is if he lets her ask for help or spreads the word that he has been captured. But despite our boy's advice, Pax remained determined to follow his own methods. Because of this, he decided to lock up the protagonist and wait for Roxy to arrive. And even though his first days in the city weren't as good as he expected, our boy felt happy to be in free lodging. Obviously, he ignored the fact that he was imprisoned. Suddenly, he was greatly surprised when Sanova, the third prince of Chirone, visited him in his cell. But what the heck is this weirdo doing here? Well, he simply wanted to talk to him to ask if he knows the author of the artwork the guards found in his bag. Yes, he's talking about the Ruiger figurine, which was created by our boy. Clearly, Rudio played dumb for a long time, as he didn't want to reveal that he was the secret author of that figurine. However, after seeing that Sanova really admired him for the work he did with a figure of Roxy, he revealed that he is actually the creator of that work. On the other hand, two palace guards met with the Dead M group to inform them that one of their members was captured, and since nothing in life is free, they asked for help to rescue their families from the palace in exchange for the information provided, as Pax has them captive against their will. Hearing their touching story, Ruiger assured them he would save their family and also recover his friend. Meanwhile, Rudius tried to manipulate Sanova by taking advantage of his fandom to get him to remove the barrier, preventing him from using magic. Unfortunately, the third prince is completely useless. Because of this, he abandoned our boy and assured him he would look for someone to help. Next, Sanova went to Pax's room and took him by the nose to bring him before the protagonist. Then, using his monstrous strength, he squeezed his brother's head and demanded that he release our boy immediately. But since Pax refused, his brother threatened to take off his head if he kept causing trouble. In the end, Sanova's little squeeze was enough for Pax to free the protagonist, who in turn managed to free both Aisha and Lilia, who the next day gave him a small wooden box that Rudios treasures greatly. The reason he cherishes it so much is that it contains a gift from Sylphie and a pair of used panties. Then, she wished him a happy birthday and hugged him warmly so Rudios could feel her body, as she missed him a lot. Later, Lilia and Aisha said goodbye to our boy, though they promised they would see each other again soon, and to Rudios' surprise, his little sister discovered it was him, despite his attempts to hide it the whole time. So, before their carriage disappeared, she apologized for considering him a pervert every time she was asked about him. Several days later, we see our boy's journey continue through snowy mountains, which were filled with red dragons. Obviously, Eris wants to fight them to test her strength, although Ruyer forbids it, as even the most powerful warriors in history couldn't take them on, since they are extremely strong, at least when they are in a group, as they are right now. Suddenly, the friendly chat led by Ruiger came to a sudden halt as both he and Eris detected two disturbing presences a few meters from their position. Then, an imposing aura appeared on the path, accompanied by a young woman wearing a mask to hide her identity. The boys could only hold their breath as they passed by, her aura so dark that they couldn't think clearly. Ruiger, his face pale with fear, begged his friends not to move, and while they obeyed, their pet did not, jumping into the void against its will. Next, the guy revealed he knows Eris and Ruiger well. They both asked him who he was and demanded to know how he found out their names. As expected, the mysterious man ignored their question, lamenting that he found them so soon, telling his companion it was time to leave. However, before that could happen, Rudius stopped them and introduced himself, asking for the man's name. The guy replied that his name is Orsted. He then asked which grey rat he was the son of, to which Rudius told him he was Paul's son. Orsted, surprised, questioned if that was true, since Paul only has 2 daughters, and as he approached Rudius, he confessed it was strange for someone to look him in the eye. Rudius assured him that he actually didn't want to because he was very scared. Still, out of respect, he did. Then Rudius asked if he had any information about the mana disaster that shook his village, to which Orsted claimed he had no idea. Before Rudius could continue on his way, the Dark Aura guy asked if he knew anything about a so-called God-man. Surprised that he knew about him, Rudius tried to explain that he actually sees him in his dreams. But before he could finish, Ruiger pulled him out of the way just in time as he was about to eliminate him. This situation sparked a small fight, demonstrating how powerful he was compared to Rudius and his friends, as he didn't even have to try to knock them out with just his hands. In the end, after leaving Rudius near death, he asked him to deliver a message to the God-man, saying that the dragon god Orsted is going to kill him. However, Rudius was far from giving up, so he used the little energy he had left to conjure a powerful attack. Unfortunately, Orsted just summoned a dragon portal and absorbed his attack effortlessly. Then, impressed by the amount of mana Rudius possessed, he decided it was best for the world to eliminate the little one who tried to kill him. Because of this, he used his hands to take Rudius's life, and now, as Orsted and Nanahoshi walked away, we hear Eris desperately pleading for help, seeing how Rudius was slowly losing his life. Next, Rudius appeared with the God-man, who, after a lot of meaningless chatter trying to explain why Orsted hated him, revealed to Rudius that he wasn't dead yet, and quickly sent him back to Eris's arms, who told him he was saved by Orsted because Nanahoshi recommended saving his life. And although Rudius still didn't understand why they did it, he decided to focus his energy on comforting Eris, who was overwhelmed by the situation, having almost lost her 2 companions. Days later, we see Rudius still having nightmares about his encounter with the dragon god. Because of this, he couldn't even rest properly. So, after waking up in the middle of the night, Ruyer asked him who the God-man was. Obviously, there was no better time to ask that question. Cornered, Ruyer had no choice but to tell him what he knew. Among these things was the incredible revelation that the curse that turned Rudius into a super is slowly fading over time. As expected, the news made Rudius's friend very happy, so happy that he even shed a few tears of joy. Noticing this, Rudius decided it was a good time to try to sleep a little longer. The next day, after a long journey, Rudius finally returned home, or at least what was left of it. Clearly, as he walked through the ashes, many memories flooded his mind about the days when he was so happy just being a child. Then, after achieving the goal of his adventure, Roger, petting the heads of the kids one last time, told both Rudius and Eris that from now on, they would no longer be just kids, and thanked them for all the time spent together, as he himself helped him become a better person. Later, he revealed that it was time to leave, although he assured them they would see each other again someday. After Ruiger's departure, we see Rudius and Eris walking through the camp set up by those who lost their homes. There, they coincidentally met Ghislaine and Alphonse, who, after the reunion, brought terrible news, as Lord Sorus, Lord Philippe, and Lady Hilda had lost their lives. 2 of them died in conflict territory. On the other hand, Sorus was executed after being deemed responsible for the teleportation disaster. Additionally, Alphonse told them that this situation was exploited by Philemon Notos Grey Rat, who wants to take Eris as his concubine. These words enraged Ghislaine because he considered it an insult that Philemon was even considering the offer, as he was an idiot who wouldn't make Eris happy, but Alphonse assured him that was of little importance, as he only wanted to save the Vorius family and the Fitoa region. This situation greatly upset Eris, who ordered everyone to leave because she needed time to think alone. Hours later, we see Eris visiting Rudius's shop, who never imagined what was about to happen, as his friend was very heated and demanded he fulfill the promise they made for when she turned 15, meaning they had to sleep together after showing affection. And even though Rudius wanted to touch Eric's body with all his heart, he knows it's not the right time. That's why he promises to keep his word and will only fulfill his promise when Eric turns 15. However, after hearing some seductive words in his ear, our boy changed his mind, unable to contain his desire, and made Eris his as she wished. But the next day, when Rudius woke up happy from the night they had, he was shocked to find that Eris had left him, believing their lives don't align yet and that it's best for her to travel with Ghislaine. As expected, this shattered the protagonist's heart, who walked through the city's ruins in tears, holding his beloved's farewell letter. In the days that followed, we see that while Rudy sinks into sadness, Eris takes advantage of her journey with her teacher to improve her sword skills. Meanwhile, Ruyer continues to do good deeds with the adventurers he meets. A few days later, we see that almost by accident, while helping Kishirika, Roxy got a lead that could help her find the protagonist's family. Meanwhile, Paul reunited with his beloved daughter Aisha and Lilia, embracing them as they cried during their reunion, a moment witnessed by the Demon Empress, who told Roxy everything. As if that weren't enough, Kishirika revealed that on the continent of Begarit, it's highly likely he could find the protagonist's mother in the labyrinth city of Rapham. But as if this information weren't important enough, she mentioned how sad Rudius looks in the central continent. After the Demon Empress left, Roxy returned to her companions to inform them they would set off for Begarid. Meanwhile, Rudius, having overcome his depression, decided it was a good time to start searching for his mother. On the other hand, we go back a few days to see how Eris, after exploring the city under Ruyer's care, headed to the Adventurers Guild to take on the goblin job she saw on the job board, which, by the way, pays a bronze piece from Millie's for each goblin she kills. Suddenly, while accepting the job, she heard some adult adventurers bothering a child who, if you ask me, deserved it because the arrogant dwarf thinks he has the strength of an A rank when he hasn't even passed rank 1. However, despite noticing his egocentric attitude, Eris helped him get left alone. Unfortunately, all she received was the child's ingratitude, who even called her ugly. As expected, this made her so angry that she gave him a few hits to teach him to respect his elders. Next, she stormed out of the guild, but not alone, as the boy, named Cliff Grimoire, followed her, trying to apologize because he knew he had reacted in the worst way possible. After a formal introduction, Cliff assured her they would make a great team because they were both very strong, but still upset by what he said, Eris refused and rejected all the help he offered. Faced with this, Cliff knew this was an opportunity he couldn't miss, so he begged her to let him help her from the back, claiming she would see he was unlike any mage she'd ever met. Minutes later, we see that during the fight against the goblins, Cliff proved to be quite strong. Unfortunately, he's just a child blinded by power. Because of this, Eris revealed that he wouldn't actually be useful in that team. But, unwilling to give up, Cliff insisted that to prove he was really strong, they should visit the nearby forest, as just watching him kill goblins wouldn't show her his true power. However, after a while walking through the forest, Eris confessed to her companion that they were lost. Therefore, using her master's teachings, she concentrated hard to sense human presence near their location. In this way, they accidentally witnessed something they shouldn't have, as the men working for the Pope were trying to end the life of a blessed child, who was being protected by the temple knights. Faced with this situation, she prepared to intervene before a tragedy occurred, but Cliff, very scared, warned her that intervening would be buying a ticket to her death, as the Pope's warriors were extremely powerful. Hearing this, Eris assured him it was too late to back down because the warriors had already seen them. Still, she asked him to stay hidden while she fought them. Next, we see that after a hard fight, our boy's friend shone in front of everyone by taking down all the Pope's warriors by herself. Then, Teresa Latria thanked her for her help. Because of this, Eris confessed that if she wanted to thank her, she could show her the way back home. So, Eris told Cliff it was time to leave, to which he stood by her side wearing a helmet from the defeated warriors. However, as they were leaving, we discovered that Cliff was actually the lord of the Pope's warriors, and although Eris didn't know it, thanks to Ruiger keeping track, he was able to detect this great deception. In the end, both Eris and Cliff returned to the city, where, as soon as they arrived, Cliff proposed to Eris, who immediately rejected him. This shattered the little mage's heart, and although anger filled him, he couldn't do anything against Eris's beauty, as just looking at her left him unable to move in awe of her loveliness. Therefore, with his head held high, he assured the redhead that it was time for their paths to part. Later, we see a very saddened nun informing Cliff that his beloved guardians have fallen in battle, meaning conflict with the archbishop is inevitable. Clearly, he was already aware of the situation and asked to be left alone because he had things to think about. This story begins with Sylphie falling from the sky into the courtyard of Princess Ariel, who was with her attendants discussing the perfection of the dessert she was eating. As the princess tasted her desserts, Derek advised her to be cautious, as she's been following dubious rumors, which is dangerous for someone about to become a monarch. She, a bit embarrassed, reminded him she's the second princess, meaning she may never be chosen as queen, having 2 brothers and an older sister. She assured him her only role is to have tea and do as she pleases. Suddenly, both Ariel and her servant were startled by a commotion nearby. To the surprise of Ariel's guards, it was a giant boar charging straight at the princess. They prepared to take it down before it could reach her. However, before they could act, Sylphie fell onto the monster while trying to use her powers to avoid serious harm. Unbeknownst to her, she managed to defeat the beast threatening the princess. Clearly, after such a fall, the little elf lost consciousness and lay in a field of flowers. Later, we see her waking up with Ariel, who reveals she's in the Asura palace and asks where she's from. Sylphie, a bit embarrassed, shyly replies that she comes from a good day and has no idea why she suddenly appeared in the sky. The princess, showing no emotion, tells her that the region she comes from has fallen, meaning her home no longer exists, and finding her family or friends will be very difficult. She also informs her that she might be punished for sneaking into the palace. However, she confesses that since she sees no malice in her, she wants to prevent her from being punished. For that reason, she offered to completely change her identity so she could stay by her side while they search for her family. Sometime later, we see Sylphie embracing her new identity as Fitz, a protector and servant of Princess Ariel, attending an important meeting of nobles, where she met Lord Pylemont, the father of her loyal protector Luke. But although the princess wanted to speak to him privately, they were interrupted by Gravel, Ariel's older brother, who, noticing his sister's little scheme, wasted no time in interrupting their conversation. Far from being polite, he violently demanded Lord Pylemont not to forget whom he owes his loyalty. He also warned him to stop playing with children and take things seriously. Next, we see that during the meeting, Fitz feels very uncomfortable, especially as everyone talks about her, believing she's a bastard child of some noble. But Ariel, noticing this, began to sing beautifully, to draw the attention of those present and keep them from focusing on her beloved friend. Later, we find Gravel watching a play with Darius, and while they enjoy the company of some girls, they discuss the future of the kingdom, which worries the princess's brother, as he thinks his sister is pulling too many strings and fears a coup. For this reason, he ordered Darius to do everything in his power to prevent her from gaining more power. Hours later, we discover that Baldy's plan is to assassinate the princess, who, fortunately, was sleeping next to Fitz on the night this was to happen. But why the hell are they sleeping together? Ariel was informed by Luke that Fitz struggles to sleep due to nightmares. That's why the princess thought that if she slept next to someone she trusts, she might sleep better. However, it was quite a night for Fitz to sleep with the princess, as in the middle of the night, she had to jump out of bed upon realizing someone was lurking in the shadows. Soon, Ariel's room turned into a battlefield, where Fitz lost consciousness again after taking down the assassin sent by Darius. As expected, the huge commotion caught Locke's attention, who rushed into the room to find out what was happening. The next day, Ariel met with Pylemont, who revealed that she was attacked by the infamous assassin Nighthawk, assuring her that this confirms their enemy is within the palace. Therefore, he advised her to leave the country under the pretense of studying abroad to avoid another attack. Although the princess doesn't want to flee her kingdom, she decided to take his advice, believing that leaving would allow her to connect with powerful foreign figures. Next, after confirming that Luke can accompany her, she decides to relieve Fitz of her duties as a bodyguard, as all this time she had been taking advantage of her crime to keep her as a servant, and since she can no longer search for her family as she longs to, she thinks it's better for her to be a free person. However, Fitz refuses to leave her side and confesses that they are now friends, so she will do everything possible to protect her whenever she needs it. Meanwhile, far to the north, we discover that Rubeus is traveling in a small caravan of adventurers while trying not to draw attention. Unfortunately for him, his quiet demeanor only attracted unwanted glances, especially from two adventurers who wanted to know why he was traveling so sadly. Realizing they genuinely wanted to know what was wrong, he told them he was on a quest to find his mother, who disappeared along with the region of Fatoa. The girls, hearing this, asked how he planned to find her, as the north is vast, to which Rudios, a bit rudely, replied that he didn't know yet, but he was sure he'd figure it out. But the adventurous woman, far from giving up on him, decided to help by telling him about the northern kingdoms, which are generally very poor, except for 3 great magical kingdoms that have thrived. The kingdom of Renoa is known for its magical education, the Duchy of Neris for creating magical items, and the Duchy of Bacharant for its study of magic. Hours later, after a long, long journey, the protagonist reached the Duchy of Bacharant, a snow-covered city where he quickly sought a place to sleep for at least a month. The next day, we see our boy, quite embarrassed, heading to the Adventurers Guild to disband his group, which caught the attention of everyone around him, as they believed he was a poor boy who lost all his friends in battle. Still, ignoring the comments, the protagonist prepared to take on an almost impossible quest. However, the receptionist stopped him, saying he needed a group first. Suddenly, just as Rudius was getting impatient, the adventurer who told him about the northern kingdoms approached to help, offering that she and her friend Sarah could join him. Even though Rudius wasn't very convinced, he had no choice but to accept their help to take the job. So, the older adventurer took him to the rest of the group to share a drink, while they prepared for the mission. The next day, early in the morning, everyone got ready to embark on the mission. Before leaving, Rudius introduced himself as a mage who can cast spells without incantations, which left more than one person speechless. Then, during the journey, the adventurer who had helped him introduced herself as Susan, the sub-leader of Counter Arrow and a frontline fighter. Timothy then followed suit, revealing that he is the rear combat mage and the current leader of the group. After him, the other guys introduced themselves as well. Because of this, Rudius officially met Mimir, a healing mage, and Patris, another frontline fighter. Later, after a small dinner, Rudius and his companions decided to ambush the Looster grizzlies they were tasked to hunt. And although things seemed to be going too well, so well that it became suspicious, we see how the monsters surprised the whole group as they ran towards them, covered in mud, which protected them from Timothy's flames. Faced with the situation, everyone tried to flee. But Rudius, tired of living alone, planned to stand his ground against the monsters and die once and for all. However, before that could happen, Susan stopped the monster in front of him and told her teammates to run while she distracted the grizzlies. Unfortunately, her plan wouldn't work at all since they were surrounded by the monsters. Because of this, instead of being intimidated, the whole group prepared to fight for their lives. Meanwhile, Rudius watched the situation, not understanding why no one was trying to escape, and instead, they fought relentlessly, even though they were at a disadvantage. Finally, thanks to the determination of his companions, Rudius remembered his motivation to keep going. Realizing that his teammates were exhausted, he decided to step forward in the fight and eliminate the lurking monsters with a big smile. As expected, everyone was amazed by the monstrous power Rudius possessed, and now they sighed in relief that the danger had passed. Next, we see how, during dawn, everyone busied themselves collecting the hides of the monsters to complete their task. Later, upon returning to the guild, the group attracted the attention of other adventurers who envied their success in completing the nearly impossible task. However, Timothy, aware of the situation, started building a good relationship with the others by inviting them for the next round of drinks. Several months later, we see that Rudius feels very happy because the adventure with his new friends reminded him why he decided to become an adventurer. Because of this, he set aside his sadness and regained the motivation to continue his journey. Therefore, since that day of celebration, Rudius worked as an adventurer in the city and took on all kinds of tasks so that people would always remember his name. Moreover, Rudius believes this is the best way to find his mother, Zenit, as soon as possible, since if someone hears his name, it's likely to catch her attention. Next, we discover that little by little, Rudius begins to be known in the city, though not in the way he would like, as no one remembers him by his first name. Everyone calls him Swampy. Still, instead of feeling offended, Rudius feels proud that his name is on everyone's lips, which is why he accepts various tasks over the days. Meanwhile, we can see that, from the shadows, Sarah watches him closely, as even though she doesn't want to admit it, Rudius has also caught her attention. Later, Sarah herself revealed to Rudius that the group would soon take on a new task. Because of this, she needs to know if he will join them. Rudius, somewhat hesitant and aware that working in a group won't help him with his goal, asks when they will leave. She, a bit offended, assures him that if he doesn't want to go, he doesn't have to accept out of obligation, because, in any case, no one needs him, or at least that's what she thinks. Suddenly, Susan and the others interrupted their conversation to invite Rudius once again to the next adventure. This time, instead of being hesitant, Rudius accepted to go with them, still unclear about the kind of task they would take on. Hours later, we see the group traveling to the Gargau ruins, one of the many fortresses left from the first war between demons and humans. You might be wondering, what the heck are they doing in such a remote place? Well, the mission they accepted is to collect as many snowdrake scales as possible, and although everything seemed to indicate it would be a fairly simple task, things got out of control in just a few seconds when a group of snowdrakes ambushed them while they were collecting scales. Faced with this situation, just like last time, Rudius tried to stop the monsters so his friends could escape to safety. However, contrary to what he thought, his companions were no cowards. Instead of thinking of leaving him behind, they took better positions and then launched their attack. Clearly, everything happening caught Rudius's attention, who seemed lost in thought due to the emotions this stirred in his heart. Sarah, noticing this, scolded him in a firm tone, demanding that he stop wasting time and start fighting. Suddenly, a blonde guy and his group of thugs called Stepid Leader burst onto the scene to annihilate the monsters, but instead of thanking the group for their help, the leader punched Timothy in the face for stealing their prey. Furious, Susan assured him they had no idea they were working in the area. The leader of Stipper Leather pointed out that he shouted it loud and clear when they were at the guild. However, what he doesn't know is that, except for Rudius, none of the other guys heard his words. Still, Rudius insists that their mission must take place in the Ilbram cave. Susan, very angry, tells the blonde guy that it's still a day's journey away. But just when things seemed to spiral out of control, Timothy calmed everyone down and asked his friends to lower their weapons. He then reveals that he thinks he understands what's going on because he heard a rumor about how the Ilbram cave connects to the ruins. Finally, with the misunderstanding cleared up, everyone returned to the guild to celebrate their successful mission. However, during the celebration, everything went south with the arrival of Soldat, the leader of Steppen Leader and the strongest guy in the guild. After apologizing once again for the trouble caused by his drunkenness, he started confessing how much he hates our guy for always having a disdainful look, acting like he suffers the most in the world, making him a damn pessimist. The protagonist, far from causing trouble, apologized for making him uncomfortable and promised to keep his distance from now on. Hearing this, Soldat got even angrier because he can't stand Rudius's carefree attitude. In this situation, his friend Conrad had to step in to get him out of there since he was saying a lot of nonsense due to his drunkenness. A few days later, while the protagonist was still thinking about Soldat's words, he received terrible news. His friends returned to the guild very sad, because they think Mimir and Zara have died during a mission. However, due to the strong blizzard outside, they can't even go out to check, but our guy, worried about his friends, decides to handle the situation alone and heads toward the Tria forest. They probably think it's dangerous because no one wants to go out in the blizzard, but this isn't a big problem for Rudius, who has the magical ability to change the weather and clear the blizzard around him. Hours later, we see how, while thinking about what he would do if he found the girls, Rudius spotted a group of monsters near his position. So, without much effort, he took them out. Surprisingly, among them, he found Mimir's remains, which shattered his heart completely. And, as if that weren't enough, upon closer inspection, he spotted one of Zara's earrings among the monster's remains. In this situation, Rudius mourns their deaths and feels sad, thinking about how the last time he spoke with Sarah, their relationship was no longer as cold as it once was. Suddenly, something attacked our guy, who, after dodging the attack, saw that Sarah was still alive, though trapped inside a tree. Without a second thought, he rushed to save her before it was too late. Then, the protagonist took her to a safe place and used magic to heal her wounds. The next day, before starting the journey back to the city, we see Sarah, with tears in her eyes, thanking our guy for coming to save her, no matter how dangerous the situation was. Later, when they both arrived in the city, they were greeted by the rest of their friends, who, in tears, thanked Rudius for helping them. Several days later, we find out that after the last incident, our guy started working full-time with his counter-arrow group, which not only brought him fame in the nearby villages, but also allowed him to get closer to Sarah, who, instead of wasting time during the group dinner, took the opportunity to invite our guy on a secret date, using the excuse that she needed a new dagger so they could have some time alone. As expected, they both had a great day, despite the nerves the protagonist felt thinking about the situation. So, after finishing their shopping date, they went out for a few drinks. There, Sarah confessed to our guy that when she's with him, she tends to drink more than usual because she feels very safe by his side. Hearing this, the protagonist wonders if she really is interested in him. However, instead of taking the next step naturally, he decided to be cautious and look for the right moment to reciprocate Sarah's feelings, who, a bit disappointed by his lack of initiative, got straight to the point and asked if they could continue the evening in her room. In this situation, Rudius became extremely nervous. Still, he chose to go with the flow and accepted Zara's proposal, who, as soon as they arrived, confessed that she was very grateful because he saved her life. Because of this, she assured him that she would let him do whatever he wanted with her. So, without hesitation, the protagonist took her by the shoulders and kissed her passionately. Unfortunately, just as he was preparing to give Sarah an unforgettable night, he discovered that his body no longer reacted like before, which made him very nervous because he knew well that Sarah had a fantastic body. As expected, this little inconvenience shattered what little he had built with her, who, before leaving very upset, warned him not to think she was in love with him and that she just wanted to give him her body as a favor. Her words shattered Rudius's heart, leaving him on the ground like a desperate fool. Because of this, after Sarah left, he visited a bar in the city to get drunk and forget what just happened. However, he was interrupted by the idiot Soldat, who, of course, picked a fight with our guy, who, furious with himself, punched him without a word. Then, he mounted him and, while hitting him in the face, asked why the hell he was always looking for a fight. But after landing a few punches, Rudius broke down in tears and revealed what truly troubled him. He didn't want to be alone. For that reason, he confessed that he always tries to appear cheerful so others want to stay with him. Soldat, far from getting angry, realized that the protagonist wasn't going through a good time. Because of this, he apologized for bothering him and offered to be his drinking buddy, as talking to someone might ease his pain. And after a few drinks, our guy managed to open up completely to Soldat, who, upon discovering that all his sadness stemmed from love problems, decided to take him to a professional. So, a few minutes later, they both visited the red light district of the city to meet Elise, who, upon discovering his name, confessed that she had heard of him because he healed her sister's wounds in winter. Next, Elise offered him a drink and then began to offer her services. Unfortunately, even with the help of a love professional, our guy's friend didn't seem to want to have fun. For this reason, they both returned disappointed to Soldat, who lamented that his brilliant idea hadn't worked. That's why he asks Lise what might be going on. She replies that in her opinion, Rudius is afraid of women, so she suggests he find a woman he knows won't hate him no matter what. Soldat, a bit worried, asks our guy if he knows anyone like that. Unfortunately, Rudius only thinks of Roxy, though he's sure it won't work. Elisel warns him that his fear won't be easy to overcome and advises him to take it slow. Hearing this, Soldat tells the protagonist that since there's nothing to be done, their only option is to drink until they pass out with some beauties. Hours later, they were kicked out of the bar because it was closing time, so they walked through the city discussing the protagonist's love troubles. Soldat suggests he try talking to Sarah to clear things up, since she might actually like him. He also advises him not to rush things with the girl, because unlike Zara, he needs time to get used to her. However, Rudius, dazed from drinking, insists he doesn't want anything to do with a girl who doesn't even have Lice's big breasts. He also confesses he didn't enjoy the silly shopping date at all. Unfortunately for him, despite Soldat trying to hush him, Sarah heard all the nonsense he said. Heartbroken and furious, she walked up to Rudius and slapped him hard in front of his friends. With tears in her eyes, she tells him she never wants to see him again. Susan, who was with Sarah, sadly tells our guy that this isn't how you treat people, then leaves to find her friend. Realizing his only friends left because of his foolishness, Rudius tries to take his life with the same dagger he brought to Sarah, but Soldat quickly stops him, warning him not to act rashly and insisting he go after Zara to explain everything. Instead of following his advice, the protagonist reveals he doesn't care anymore because none of this matters. Still, Soldat, wanting to prevent Rudius from falling into a deep depression, invites him to join his team on the journey to the newly discovered labyrinth in the Neris Duchy. A year later, we see life in the Neris Duchy is anything but easy, as during one of the city's missions, the whole group got caught in a snowstorm, facing both a pack of Luster Grizzlies and a red dragon. As expected, the dragon was too much for Soldat and his guys. In this situation, Rudius took charge to buy time for their escape. However, to our guy's surprise, it wasn't even necessary for his companions to flee, as he managed to defeat the beast alone with just a few moves. This left all the adventurers stunned, celebrating that the protagonist took down a strong beast that would earn them a good reward. In the following days, we see our guy continues training as usual and living peacefully in the city until a new quest arises. Unfortunately for him, it seems fate had other plans, as during the night, a goddess broke into his dreams like she hadn't in 2 years. She convinced him to attend the university to learn things that would make him a great adventurer. The next day, we see Rudy followed the goddess's advice and, before starting his journey to the Renoa kingdom, said goodbye to his friends, especially Soldat, who didn't seem too happy about his departure. So, without wasting time, they visited the Magic University to meet Genus, who welcomed them and took them to a special room where Rudius would take a skills test. Genus asked him to face the university's greatest genius, who, like him, could cast spells without chanting. As expected, our clueless protag didn't even realize the person in front of him was his old friend Sylphie. Next, we see Rudio hold nothing back and humiliate Fitz in front of the whole class using interruption magic to stop him from casting spells. But realizing he embarrassed Fitz, he quickly thanked him loudly for showing off just because he was new. He then whispered that he'd properly thank him another time. Later, Rudy tells us that from that day on, he lived in the university dorms as a special student, meaning he didn't even have to attend classes, just a monthly tutorial. He also had total freedom to move around the academy. Later, despite having some freedom, Rudius was forced to attend the welcome ceremony. There, Ariel gave her speech as president of the university council. As always, a charismatic speech, urging everyone to avoid discrimination among races, since students from all over the world attend the academy. Then, as the protag entered his tutorial room, he ran into an old acquaintance, Sanova, who, upon recognizing his teacher, rushed over to give him a big hug. He then introduced his beast companion named Linnea de Doldia, who bluntly confessed to the protag that she didn't like him at all. Still, Rudio humbly introduced himself, which made a good impression on Linnea, who revealed she was a fifth-year student and the daughter of Chief Gaies from the Great Daldia Forest. Next, the protag noticed another girl in the room and asked her name. She, with little enthusiasm, replied that her name was Persena and that she was pretty much the same as Linnea. Then, a gloomy guy in the same class introduced himself as Cliff Grimoire, the so-called prodigy wizard. He also mentioned that, despite being a second-year student, he already knew advanced magic of all kinds. Then, he asked if it was true that not only was he a wizard, but also very skilled with a sword. The protag assured him he had some knowledge of fencing and asked who told him that. He replied it was Eris, but warned that she wasn't at the academy, and no matter how much Rudius tried to find out how they knew each other, Cliff chose to ignore him. Sonova quickly approached our boy to tell him he still needed to meet Silent, the only one allowed to skip classes or mental tutorials. Later, the protag explored the university, investigating every corner until he stumbled upon the massive library. There, he accidentally ran into Fitz, who was amazed to discover that Rudius was trying to find information about the transfer of Fitoa, especially to locate his childhood friend. Which, if you ask me, is a bit cruel since she's right in front of him, but Sylphie can't say anything to keep her identity secret. A few hours later, after searching for a long time in the library, Rudy was about to head back to his fourth year when suddenly, a piece of women's underwear fell into his hands. This alerted the other girls, who quickly surrounded him, accusing him of being a panty thief. As if that wasn't enough, a gorilla woman landed nearby, scolding him for stealing Princess Ariel's underwear. Fortunately for Rudius, before things turned into a public lynching, Fids arrived to save him, claiming the panties fell from him while he was trying to help them. Still, the gorilla woman refused to let the protag go because he was in a forbidden area. Because of this, Fids explained that Rudius had just arrived and had no idea about the Academy's special rules. Thanks to his help, our boy avoided getting into serious trouble with the Academy girls. A few days later, we see Fit approach the protag while he was just investigating the transfer of Fitoa. There, he revealed he was also investigating the incident because he lost someone special during it. Feeling a bit embarrassed, he asked if they could investigate together. Obviously, Rudius didn't hesitate for a second to agree, knowing that the more help he got, the faster he would uncover the truth. However, after spending so much time with Fix, he began to suspect something strange was happening because every time he saw him smile, his heart raced. Clearly, this caught our boy's attention, and during a walk with Fitz, he started to wonder if he was really starting to be interested in men. Still, rather than getting flustered, Rudius decided to follow God's advice and let things flow naturally. Later, we see our boy Fitz and Sonova decide to take advantage of their day off from the academy to visit the slave market, as he needed to find an ideal one to help Sonova, who was struggling to keep up with his teacher's lessons. You might wonder why the protag's lessons are so tough. Well, it's not what you think, as they're not learning combat skills, but Rudius is teaching him to make human-shaped dolls with magic, something a perverted otaku like Sonova plans to use well. You know what I mean? After searching the shop for a while, thanks to one of the experienced sellers, they found their ideal potential slave, a 6-year-old dwarf who was enslaved due to a family debt. But why do they need such a young dwarf? The reason is that the younger they are, the better for the protag in Sonova's plans, as she will be more willing to learn magic without chanting. Plus, by developing her magical abilities so early, her potential will skyrocket. However, as you might expect from a slave market, the girl was not in good condition, and she even had a look of despair, wanting to die as soon as possible. Feeling a connection with her, Rudios asked if she really wanted to die, and offered to end it all if she wished. The girl, in tears, assured him she didn't want to die. Because of this, the Prota decided she was the perfect candidate for the job he needed, and without hesitation, he bought her. After rescuing the girl from that terrible place, the guys took her for some food and named her Juliet, since she had none, as dwarves are named at 7. The next day we see Juliet starting to work as Sonova's servant, while the Prota taught her to use magic without incantations. Thanks to this, the doll-making project began to progress slowly. A month later, we see Rudius proud of how much Juliet has improved, as she is quite good at magic, just as he expected. For that reason, he adopted her as his disciple. This strengthened his relationship with Sanova. However, one day there was an accident when he explained to his new companion the importance of the figures he makes, mentioning the first dolls he created. So, Ruddy asked to see Roxy's doll. Unfortunately, due to the type of lenses, it had been destroyed. This unleashed the Prota's fury, who scolded his first disciple for not respecting his former teacher. In light of this, Sanova assured him it broke accidentally after Linia and Porcena challenged him to a duel where he had to wager something valuable. Then, in tears, the boy apologized to his master, who, very upset, told him he should have mentioned it earlier, as he would never have been so kind to those delinquents who stole and destroyed a handcrafted figure. With a somewhat ominous look, Rubio assured his disciples he would teach those two troublemakers a lesson. A few minutes later, we see both the Prota and Sanova cross paths with the Beast Girls. They didn't hesitate to challenge them to a duel, and even though they initially refused because they are now model students, our girl started mocking them, claiming they were scared. This ignited Linia's fury, who lunged at Rudios intending to kill him. Unfortunately for them, the Prota is not an easy opponent, as he didn't even need Sanova's help to humiliate and immobilize them. Later, the girls woke up very scared and tied up in the Prota's room, who, after explaining why they ended up in this situation, told them that if they wanted to be freed, they would have to repair Roxy's figure, or else face severe punishment, just like Giwes did to him when he falsely accused him of offending the divine beast, Alacadorum. However, after thinking for a moment, Rubio realized he could fix the figure himself. For that reason, he decided to seek Fitz's advice to find an appropriate punishment for the Beast Girls. Hours later, they returned to the Prota's room, where they found the girls in a deplorable state, so before imposing any punishment, they had to help them clean up a bit because, being tied up, they had relieved themselves in the same spot where the Prota left them. Finally, after agreeing on certain terms for their release, Fitz proceeded with his brilliant idea to punish the Beast Girls. He took a special paint and tattooed the prisoners, warning them that if they didn't keep their word, a verbal spell would make their tattoos permanent. However, after the girls left, Fitz revealed to the Prota that this type of paint doesn't even exist. Still, he was sure that both Linia and Persina would accept the punishment of keeping their tattoos all day, as they probably had no idea it was all a ruse. A few days later, we see that while Ruthius was walking around the academy, he discovered a group of students beating up another for no apparent reason. He didn't hesitate to intervene, although Cliff, far from thanking him for his help, scolded him for meddling where he shouldn't. After thinking for a few seconds, he realized how wrong he was and thanked the Prota for saving him. The next day, after gaining a bit more trust with our boy, Cliff asked him to accompany him to the girls' dorm. There, he left Rudius speechless when he confessed he was in love with Lynn Elise, and as if that wasn't surprising enough, he begged him to introduce them, knowing they were close friends. Clearly, Rudius refused and told him to think it over before doing so, as he knew she wasn't a good woman for a guy like him. Later, the Prota met with Fitz in the library, asking for love advice to handle this situation, and after discussing Cliff's romantic problem, they concluded that the best option would be to introduce him to Lena Liz and let him deal with his crush's promiscuity. So, at sunset, Rudius took his new friend to the perverted Lena Liz, who, after meeting Cliff, scolded our boy and reminded him that she was cursed. For that reason, she can't love just one man. Because of this, the Prota told her to kindly reject her new friend if she wasn't interested in him. However, the next day, Rudio was stunned when he entered class and found that Aline Alice did the exact opposite of what he said, as she decided to start dating Cliff. Months later, with the arrival of autumn, a very strange phase began at the academy, as it was the time when the opposite sexes of the Doldias challenged each other for family leadership, somewhat like a mating ritual. So, Linia and Persena decided to confine themselves to their room to avoid being challenged to pointless duels by those aspiring to become nobles. Additionally, as a precaution, they named our boy the pack leader, meaning he would represent them in those duels. Because of this, Rudius locked himself in the library to buy time before having to defeat a bunch of weaklings. However, a few hours later, he discovered that none of that would be necessary, as the Emperor's fiancé from the demon world, a guy named Body Gabi, annihilated all the contenders to avoid waiting to face the Prota. Faced with this situation, Rudius had no choice but to accept his challenge, so, in front of a large crowd, they faced off in a duel. However, it wouldn't be a normal confrontation, as Badigabi knew well about our boy's potential. For that reason, he proposed a deal. He'll let you use your strongest attack just once, and if you hurt him, you'll be declared the winner. Otherwise, you'll have to accept defeat. Clearly, our guy accepted without hesitation, as he doesn't want to waste more time on this Dahlia girl issue. Next, Rudius took his time to shape a massive magic drill, which he used to pierce the Demon King. After taking the hit, the king revealed that it nearly killed him, so he declared Rudius the winner. Still, Buddy Gabi didn't hold back and punched him hard in the face to show he's strong too. Hours later, Fitz had to heal Rudius's face, and after saying goodbye, he decided to take a well-deserved break. Months later, after much research, our guy concluded that Fatoha's transfer is similar to summoning magic, though he knows it's impossible to summon humans. So, he asked Fitz if he knew anyone skilled in that type of magic. Fitz quickly told him about Silent 7 Stars, the mysterious special student who enjoys more benefits than anyone else at the academy. Although our guy thinks it will be hard to meet her, he decided to try anyway. Hours later, we see Rudius manage to get a date with Silent, who left him speechless when she revealed they were old acquaintances. Upon seeing her, he panicked and tried to flee the room, but the shock made him faint before he could get far. A few minutes later, Rudius woke up with Fitz, telling him he had a terrible nightmare where a woman in a white mask tried to kill him. Fitz, feeling a bit awkward, pointed out it wasn't a nightmare, while indicating where Silent was. She asked why he fears her so much after she saved his life when he was on the brink of death. Confused, our guy asked where Orsted was, but she assured him he could relax because Orsted promised to leave him alone, at least for now. Then, she asked him to answer 3 questions and made it clear he had to be as honest as possible, or things wouldn't end well. Next, she showed him a paper with the names Akito Shinhohara and Seiji Kuroki written on it. Our guy froze upon seeing the names in the language from his old world, while he heard that Silent could also speak it herself. Finally, she asked which of the 2 names was his, as she had no idea, but Rudius, embarrassed, replied that it was neither. Although Silent didn't get what she needed, she was satisfied to find out he could understand her. On the other hand, Fitz asked what language they were speaking and how he knew it too. In response, she assured him there was nothing to worry about, as Rudius and she came from the same place. Then, she removed her mask and confessed to our guy that her real name is Shizuka Nanahoshi. Thanks to this, Rudius remembered that minutes before dying in his previous life, he saved a student who looked just like her. For that reason, he began to understand that Shizuka wasn't lying. In the end, she happily revealed to our guy that she was relieved he wasn't the only one who ended up in this place. Moreover, she assured him that from now on they would be allies, despite everything that had happened between them. Then, she indicated they would need to work together to return to their world soon. However, Rudius, feeling embarrassed, confessed he didn't want to go back to his old life. This crushed Silent's hopes, who scolded him and insisted she didn't plan to use knowledge from the other world to stand out here, because she wouldn't be the protagonist of a comic story. But our guy told her that, unlike her, he has both family and friends, since he was born in this world as a baby, and he doesn't want to lose them. Upon hearing this, Silent's attitude changed completely, as their arrivals in this world were different, revealing that she landed in Azura, where she was taken in by Orsted. There, she lived for 2 years, during which she fully learned the language of this world, before starting to travel with her master. Then, she shared that she traveled for a year searching for the 2 people on her list. Rudius, amazed by how quickly she did it, asked how she managed, to which she informed him that she used the transfer circles still left in the ruins from the war between demons and humans. Finally, after recounting the rest of her tragic story about how she ended up in this unknown world, Silent proposed a deal to our guy, which involved borrowing some of his magical power for her experiments, and in return, she would provide all the information he needed. Although our guy still didn't fully trust Silent, he accepted the deal, believing he could benefit from the information his new ally possessed. Then, the masked girl began to share everything she discovered about Fatoa's transfer over the last 5 years, concluding that it was a side effect caused by the summoning she underwent, making her the main cause of the devastation in that region. Clearly, upon hearing this, Fitz got furious and didn't hesitate to try to eliminate her. However, despite lacking magical power, Silent managed to create magical barriers to protect herself from Fitz's fury, who, in tears, revealed he lost his entire family in the incident. Then, Rudius tried to calm his friend, assuring him that Silent is another victim too, as she didn't want to come to this world either. Because of this, Fitz, feeling ashamed, apologized to the masked girl for losing control. Meanwhile, Silent indicated that, despite being involved, she had no idea who caused such a disaster or the reasons behind it. Finally, everyone decided that after an exhausting day, it would be best to take a break to process all the information and then meet again when they were calm. A few days later, we found out that Rudius's relationship with Silent had grown very close, as they apparently had more in common than they expected. Obviously, this made Fitz very jealous, lamenting that he still hides his true identity from our guy out of fear, as this prevents him from confessing his feelings. A year later, the incident recounts that his life remains the same as before, or at least in part, because even though he has turned 16, his days start with a good training session early in the morning. However, he no longer trains alone, as Buddy Gabby now accompanies him every day. After a quick breakfast, he attends classes, which have become tedious. Since defeating Buddy Gabby, the other students now fear him. Later, there's a boring class where Cliff keeps asking about curses. As expected, he can't wait to cure his beloved's curse, which forces her to be affectionate often. Our boy heads to lunch with his disciples. Rudios Mazor conducts summoning magic experiments in the special lab created by Silent, who, after years of research, is trying to find the right magical circle pattern to return to her world. After dinner, he teaches magic to Juliet, creating dolls while giving new lessons to Sonova. Days later, Rudios's routine is interrupted by a letter from Soldat, who is visiting the city and wants to meet for lunch. As usual, Soldat throws a big party, where Ellen Alice and her boyfriend are invited, leaving our boy's friend shocked that such a wild woman has found her ideal partner. After spending hours with friends, Soldat is informed about a guild meeting. For this reason, Rudius decides to return to university. On his way, he runs into Fitz and Luke, who, as always, doesn't seem happy to see him. Noticing Fitz's discomfort with the protagonist's arrival, she quickly steps between them. This situation raises Rudius's suspicions, wondering if Luke likes men and might be interrupting a date. Realizing he's not welcome, our boy leaves with a broken heart, unable to fathom that Fitz was avoiding him. However, hours later, he accidentally discovers he was wrong, and there's no reason to be sad, as he learns in the library that Fitz doesn't hate him and was just avoiding him because he can't speak while escorting the princess. In the following days, Rudius can't get Fitz out of his head and, despite believing he's a man, begins to accept he's in love with him. Instead of confessing his feelings, he decides to investigate whether Fitz is truly a man. However, even after talking to the vice principal, he finds nothing that contradicts what he sees. While thinking in the library, he wonders what he would do if Fitz were a woman, unsure if he'd confess his feelings due to fear. Suddenly, Fitz surprises Rudio, stumbles, and falls on him, leading our boy to realize that Fitz is actually not a man. But the princess's bodyguard, realizing his disguise is discovered, decides to flee, denying being a woman. This situation hardly phases our boy, who happily discovers his impotence issues have vanished, at least partly due to his feelings for Fitz. Days later, we see Princess Ariel summon Fitz to her office, asking her to set aside her indecision and reveal her true identity, assuring her it won't drive her away, as she considers her a friend, not a servant. Hearing this, Peach confesses she truly wants to be with the protagonist forever. She promises to try to follow her advice, but reveals she's scared Rudius might not even remember her. In response, Ariel assures her that to combat that fear, she'll help her think of the best way to reveal her identity to the protagonist. After analyzing different scenarios, the princess concludes that the best plan is to send Fitz and Rudius on a special mission. The next day, Fitz suggests they take on a task for the princess in the Hale Forest, and our boy, as clueless as ever, accepts the mission without suspecting it was all planned by the princess and Fitz. Hours later, while they search the Hale Forest for a special flower that only grows on a certain cliff, Fitz sets Ariel's plan in motion, which involves unleashing a storm during their walk. Unaware of what's happening, Rudy suggests they take refuge in a nearby cave he knows. In that cave, the magic Fitz awaited happens, as, despite the tense moment of needing to undress to dry their clothes, our boy immediately remembers that Fitz is actually his old friend Sylphie. This brings tears to Sylphie's eyes, and while hugging her, he confesses he can no longer hide the truth. She assures him she wishes he would never leave her side again. Our girl, still in shock from the revelation, tries to process what's happening. However, she decides not to miss the chance, confessing that he's also in love with her, and then kisses her passionately. Unfortunately for Rudius, just when things seemed to be going well, his little friend lost control in the blink of an eye, completely cooling the situation. The protagonist apologizes to Sylphie for his impotence, revealing he's been struggling with this mental issue for 3 years. She, far from being offended, assures him there's nothing to apologize for. They then walk hand in hand through the Hale Forest, while Sylphie tells our boy everything that's happened since they last met. The next day, Sylphie informs Princess Yaluk that her plan was a success, though she also mentions our boy's problem. As a result, while Ariel laughs at the situation, Luke seriously addresses the matter, revealing to Sylphie that he might have something to help her beloved. Minutes later, Luke returns with a small container holding a powerful aphrodisiac, warning his friend that once Rudius drinks it, he likely won't be able to control himself. Therefore, he advises her to prepare for the full animal force of the Grey Rat. That evening, Sylphie visited our boy's room. While sharing some wine, she gave him the powerful aphrodisiac, claiming it would cure his problem. The next day, we learned Luke found a solution to the protagonist's impotence. When he woke up, he saw he could give Sylphie what she desired. However, not finding her beside him, he thought he overdid it as her escort. Just as Rudius's heart began to break, Sylphie burst into the room, thrilled about the night they had, explaining she left early to thank the princess and Luke for their help. With tears in his eyes, Rudius hugged his girlfriend, showing her how much she helped him. Hours later, Sylphie brought our boy to the princess, who welcomed him warmly. The protagonist assured her he came to thank her for her help and mentioned there's a way to repay her, which he would do right away. Ariel confessed she knew, but her priority was finding her lost family during the transfer. She assured him that matters of her kingdom could wait. However, she insisted that now that he cured his illness, he shouldn't just leave Sylphie behind. Our boy replied he would never do that, even sharing he plans to marry her soon. Clearly, his words surprised Sylphie, who could barely contain her excitement. Ariel then told him that now that he would marry the protagonist, he didn't need to keep dressing as a man. In return, she said the protagonist could use her name for reputation, which would benefit them both. Rudius didn't hesitate to accept the deal, as it would make his beloved completely free. Hours later, he attended his tutoring class, catching everyone's attention with his newfound confidence and a bit of a perverted demeanor around the Doldius girls. Noticing his friends looking at him strangely, he confessed that, while he couldn't share all the details, he finally cured his rare illness. Because of this, everyone applauded and congratulated him for his achievement. Later, after fulfilling his obligations with Silent, we see the protagonist looking worried, unsure how to marry his beloved. So, during lunch, he asked his friends if they knew the steps to take. Cliff recommended that before marrying, he should first get a house where he could settle down with his wife. The next day, we see Rudy, following his friend's advice, visiting the city to find a real estate agency showing available houses in the area. However, he had no idea what kind of house would be ideal for him and Sylphie. Still, the only thing he knew for sure was that it needed to have many rooms and not cost a fortune. After a few minutes of looking at different houses, he found one that caught his attention. After leaving the agency, he visited the house with Cliff and Sonova, who were amazed, and told him it seemed too big for just 2 people. But Rudius revealed he was taking advantage of a deal because the house was rumored to be cursed, and no one wanted to exorcise it. Then, to his friend's surprise, he said it was time to get to work and deal with what no one wanted to handle. Next, we see that after checking the entire house, the boys found nothing unusual for an old house. So, they decided to spend the night there to try to eliminate the monster that gave the place its cursed reputation. Later, while the boys tried to sleep, Cliff heard something approaching from the shadows. Because of this, they all searched the house for the lurking monster. In this situation, Rudius suggested returning to the safe area where they had all their things, suspecting the monster would wait for them to fall asleep to attack. However, just before they entered the safe room, the monster surprised our boy, who was too startled to launch an effective attack. Fortunately, Sanova arrived in time to save him, thanks to his priest status protecting him from such monsters. Then, Cliff used his divine magic and tried to exorcise the monster, but his attack had no effect. After seeing this, Ruddy prepared to eliminate the monster with brute force, but Sanova asked him not to and to wait a few seconds. Then, just as Sanova predicted, the monster stopped attacking and vanished into the ground. Sanova then examined the enemy and was fascinated to discover it was a doll like the ones they make, but of better quality. Upon hearing this, our boy approached him excitedly, because if they could figure out how it worked, they could make more and fulfill countless dreams. Yes, you can imagine what these two perverts are planning, so without hesitation, they all got to work to find out where the doll came from. After exploring the mansion, they found a secret room where the creator of those wonderful engineering works kept all his research. Because of this, at dawn, the boys returned to the city after breaking the curse of Rudios's future home, and they also obtained an unprecedented object, which Sanova would investigate secretly and carefully to avoid getting hurt. Days later, after renovating the house, Rudius took his beloved to see their future home. She was speechless upon seeing the fascinating house her future husband chose and thoroughly enjoyed the tour he gave her, which ended with them breaking in the new marital bed. A week later, we see that after moving into their new home, Sylphie and the protagonist are planning their wedding celebration. So, after finishing the guest list, the boys roamed the city looking for food and new clothes. Finally, after a tiring day of shopping, they returned home for a relaxing bath that, as usual, ended in a passionate session in the marital bed. A few days later, we see that the celebration took place with most of our boy's friends and his wife present, who attempted to give a speech in front of everyone. However, while Rudy was doing this, he noticed people were looking at him strangely. For that reason, Badigabi, who also noticed, interrupted him to stop being so formal and called for a toast to the young couple's future. Then, everyone enjoyed a great day tasting the amazing food prepared by the Prota and Sylphie. They also took the chance to have a few drinks until nightfall, but no one expected what would happen next. While everyone congratulated the newlyweds, something broke the party's climax. When it was Cliff and Ellen Elise's turn, she burst into tears, leaving everyone shocked. But the most surprising thing was that Sylphie bluntly asked if she was crying because she knows she's her grandmother. To everyone's astonishment, she told Ellen Alice that her father said her grandmother went on adventures with Paul, which was why her father was kicked out of the great forest of the tribe, leading to big problems for marriage. Ellen Alice, stunned by her words, broke down, and while crying on her knees, she couldn't say anything. The Prota realized they were indeed family, as he now remembered the pendant his wife made was similar to Lena Lyce's, and upon closer inspection, he noticed they had similar faces. Given the situation, he asked Cliff to take Ellen Alice upstairs until she calmed down, as she was likely overwhelmed. Still, before heading to that room, Ellen Alice pleaded with him not to abandon Sylphie, because both she and her father are normal people, but Rudius reassured her, saying he had nothing to worry about, as he would never abandon his wife, especially not for his grandmother's reputation. A few hours later, with a new day arriving, all the guests began to say goodbye to the newlyweds. However, while Sylphie was talking to her grandmother, Ariel took the opportunity to ask the Prota to face her bodyguard Luke in a sword duel. Although this surprised our boy, he accepted the challenge to avoid being rude. Unfortunately for the princess and her boy, the duel ended as expected, with Rudius humiliating Locke. Thanks to this, Arian revealed that the duel was actually to check if her beloved friend would be in good hands, and now she could see for herself how strong her husband is. Several days later, Rudius received a letter from Paul, who, besides congratulating him on entering university, mentioned he was about to cross into Bagarit, a dangerous place for kids. For that reason, he decided to send Aisha and Anor to take care of them, although he warned that Anor doesn't like him or Aisha. Still, he asked him, as a good brother, to take good care of her. Finally, he said goodbye, apologizing for sending him such a heavy load of responsibilities, and promised they would see each other again soon. Therefore, Rudius, very happy that his father trusts him so much, returned home excited to tell Sylphie that her two sisters would be arriving soon. She, very happy for her husband, assured him they would do their best to make both feel comfortable. And after a few days, we see that Silent presents the Prota with the fruit of her 2 years of research, a gigantic magic circle that, in theory, can attract objects from another world. Eager to see if the circle really works, Rudius channeled his mana into it. Unfortunately, all of Silent's efforts went to waste in just a few seconds, as after the circle received our boy's mana, it self-destructed in a sort of short circuit. Clearly this disappointed Silent, who, somewhat upset with herself, asked the Prota to leave. And although our boy left the place a bit worried about her, he thought Silent would be able to handle a failure like this. But he was wrong, as before he finished going down the stairs to Silent's room, he heard his friend's heartbreaking screams. Because of this, he quickly returned and was stunned to see Silent lost control and began destroying all her research, believing she would never go home again. In this situation, Rudios tried to calm her down and asked her to take the day off because her face showed she was exhausted from working so hard. But since she seemed to only want to die, our boy had to carry her on his back to take her to the infirmary. On the way there, Rudius ran into Juliet Izanova, who offered to carry Silent for him. Hours later, after seeing that Silent received the necessary medical attention, the Prota told Sanova he needed her help to take Silent home, as he and Sylphie would take care of her for a while. The next day, we see that Silent woke up in Rudius's home, not understanding what the heck had happened. Our boy, seeing her face showing her poor condition, offered her some food and even invited her to use the fantastic bathtub they have at home. However, like a ghost, Silent just stared at him silently with her pale face. This situation completely disappointed the Prota, who, realizing he wouldn't get a different result, decided to leave the room, assuring her that if she needed anything, she could call him without hesitation. But before leaving the room, she revealed to him that she felt devastated, because, with the failed experiment, she realized she would never be able to return home, since she couldn't connect the right points in the magic circuit. Hearing this, the Prota decided to give her some help. To do this, he called all his friends to analyze the circle created by Silent together. Fortunately, this was a brilliant idea, because after a few minutes examining the magic circle, Sanova suggested using a trick similar to the one used by the magic doll they found in Rudius's house, which involves overlapping several magic circles to achieve the desired effect. However, she warned them that her research is very recent, and she doesn't even understand how to replicate that trick. Still, she invited him to investigate the doll to see if anyone could understand the true workings of those circuits. So, without wasting time, Cliff set out to learn how the doll works, heading to the mansion. Unfortunately, after a few minutes trying to understand the circuit, he assured his friends that the magic applied to it is on another level. Still, he promised to work hard to replicate it. Thanks to this, Silent regained hope and immediately began redrawing her magic circle with her friends' help. Finally, after days of discussing different ways to draw the magic circle, we see Rudius trying to activate it. To everyone's surprise, this time they managed to summon a plastic bottle, and while it may not seem like much, Silent was thrilled to finally make progress in her research. Several days later, we see Rudius meeting his old friend Ruiger, who was his sister's bodyguard during their long journey home. They enjoyed a few drinks by the protagonist's campfire while talking about their adventures. Finally, Ruiger reveals that he will leave the next day because he doesn't want to be a burden. As expected, this made our boy very sad, and he assured Ruiger that he would never be a burden. Still, Ruiger promised he would return soon and asked him to please stay calm and talk to Eris if he saw her again, knowing all she put him through. Despite this, he believes she deserves a second chance, so the next day, after breakfast with the protagonist's family, Ruiger said goodbye to his great friend, who thanked him for protecting his sisters. At the same time, Norm also said goodbye to her protector, but what seemed like a warm farewell turned into a small mess for our boy, as Norm desperately wanted to continue traveling with Ruiger, who insisted that wouldn't be possible and that she should now trust her brother. But the little girl pointed out that she could never trust Ruiger because she saw him hit her father. Plus, he was now with a different woman than the last time they met. Still, Ruiger did his best to reassure her and promised that Rudius is trustworthy. Hours later, during a small sibling gathering, Aisha showed the protagonist the gift sent by their father. To Rudius's surprise, the old chest contained many valuable items and 2 letters, one of which was a copy he had already received. However, in the other letter, Paul asked him to send his sisters to school, something that clearly didn't sit well with the little girls. Still, the protagonist managed to convince them to take the entrance exam for the Magic University. Several days later, Rudius was stunned to see that Aisha scored the highest on the exam. Because of this, the little girl told him that, as promised, she wouldn't force her to go to classes, since there was nothing she wanted to learn there. Instead, she wanted to help with household chores. On the other hand, Norm, a bit embarrassed for scoring below average for her age, remained silent, waiting for her older brother's decision, who kindly approached her and asked which magic department she would like to enter. But before answering, Norm warned him that the only condition for going to university would be living in the dorms. Rudius, aware that she needs her own space, decided to accept her proposal. And although he thought this would avoid problems, he ended up in deeper trouble, because Aisha felt offended that Norm was allowed to do as she pleased when she hadn't even tried to get a good grade. Because of this, she asked the protagonist if he really treats Norm better because her mother isn't a concubine. Then, in tears, she asked if he likes Norm more because, after all, they aren't even a complete family. The protagonist, surprised by her words, assured her that both she and Norm are his sisters equally, and he just tries to do better for both of them. Days later, we see that Aisha perfectly embraced the role of a maid she so desired. Meanwhile, Rudius said goodbye to North before her first day at university. Yesterday, he reminded her to follow the dorm rules and study hard. He also asked her to treat her friends well, because otherwise, he would force her to come home. Finally, he told her that if she had any problems, she could find him or Sylphie, as they would both help her right away. A month later, we see Rudius feeling very worried, because, despite the time that has passed, North doesn't seem to have made any friends. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by Linnea and Senna, who gave him a gift, warning him to only open it at home and in a private place. Unbeknownst to him, Rudy got into serious trouble, because before he could return home, he was intercepted by Luke, who took him to Princess Ariel. She revealed that her friends Dol Diaz threatened all the new female students and took their underwear under the pretense that their boss would love the gift. Upon hearing this, Rudius quickly revealed that the girls had given him a bag that morning and promised he hadn't seen anything, although knowing his girls, he was sure the bag was full of underwear. Therefore, after clarifying the situation and assuring her he wasn't desperate enough to ask for something like that, he returned all the underwear the girls had stolen 2 days ago. Later, he met with Linnea and Persenna to scold them for almost falling into a trap. They, very apologetic, assured him they didn't mean any harm and begged for mercy. Several days later, we see our boy walking very upset, accompanied by the Doldias girls. But what is he angry about? Well, Rudius discovered that his sister had been locked in her room for several days and wasn't attending classes. Therefore, aware that he went through something similar in his past life, he wanted to save her from the hell he had already lived. Thus, Rudius, furious, burst into Norm's class and revealed to the students what was happening with his younger sister. Moreover, as if that weren't enough, he demanded that the person responsible for Norm feeling bad step forward, as although he didn't plan to get angry, he wanted that person to apologize to her for making her live through hell. To our boy's surprise, he discovered that the problem was actually him, as everyone compared Norm to his performance at university, which led her to want to avoid classes. Fortunately for him, the Dahlia's girls have an idea. They got Princess Ariel to give a speech in the dining hall. Because of this, all the girls left the dorm area. Next, Linnea helps our boy sneak into the girls' dorm, hidden in the dirty laundry. Thanks to this, Rudius reaches his sister's room, facing his own past fears as he tries to talk to her, remembering how his brother tried to reason with him back in the other world. Meanwhile, Nor struggles with her own issues, feeling unloved by the protagonist, whom she has hated since the first time she saw him hit her father. And, as if that wasn't enough, the day she asked to live in the dorms, he didn't even get mad because she got what she wanted. leading her to think he doesn't care and that she's just a burden in his life. We see that Enor's first month at university was quite tough, as other students only approached her because she was Rudius's sister, the guy she hates most in the world. After much build-up, Rudius decided to talk to his sister and apologize for putting her through tough times since she arrived. On the verge of tears, she confesses they never had time to get to know each other and she has no idea how to help her. She, for her part, hearing him speak sincerely, decides for the first time to look him in the eye. To her surprise, our boy is more like her father than she expected. Thanks to this, Honor realized she had been too harsh on him and broke down in tears as her brother gave her a warm hug. Days later, Rudius proudly watches his sister, who, after the emotional release from nights before, has transformed into a completely different person and even started making new friends. But as if that wasn't enough, the little one began to spend more time with her brother, who resumed his old plan to write a book about the supers to tell the whole truth about his past. Because of this, we see Rudius working tirelessly day and night, trying to develop his idea, unsure whether to present it as a documentary, a diary, or even an epic. However, despite losing several days trying to make this decision, Nor took it upon herself to solve his problem, because Rudius shared many things about his past and believes she can write some of his stories. Clearly, Ruiger, not knowing how to proceed with his book, agreed to let her do it, though he warned her not to neglect her studies. A few days later, noticing he spends too much time with Norm, our boy decided to spend the day with Aisha, who, after asking him to pay her for her work, took him around the city to buy some things he needed. Later, after making his sister happy, Rudius met with Silent, who happily told him she made great progress in her research, and even revealed she's about to summon something organic from her old world. However, she informed him, a bit sadly, that before continuing her research properly, she would need to visit the magic authority on summoning. Next, she gave him a reward for helping her during this time, a summoning circle for light spirits, which follow their summoner while emitting bright light, though she warned him they are not endless sources of light. She also warned him that they were doing him a great favor, as even the Magic Guild doesn't know about this circle created by the person she mentioned earlier. Hours later, the protagonist visited his disciples. There, he discovered that Sonova finally finished a figure he liked, which he later gifted to Juliet. He also received the good news that Ginger was back working with Sonova, which would greatly benefit Juliet, as she could teach her about protocols, allowing her to learn more about human language. Later, the protagonist met with Cliff, who showed him the significant progress he made to cure the curse on his beloved. However, having created an object that drains a lot of mana, he needs Rudius's help to conduct experiments to improve this aspect. Next, our boy tells us that, like the others, his life has also improved quite a bit, and although his days are pretty routine, he considers himself a happy person. But, as if that weren't enough, one day Sylphie waited for him early at home to give him big news. She hasn't had her period for 2 months, which means she could be pregnant. Hearing this, Rudio was left speechless, so she excitedly asked for permission to touch her belly, and then they both embraced passionately while our boy cried tears of joy. Days later, after sharing the news with Norm, we see Aisha informing them that Princess Ariel decided to grant Sylphie a 2-year leave from her responsibilities, while Ellen Elise offered to be the new mom's bodyguard. However, just when Rudius imagined a perfect life with the whole family together, he received an unexpected letter from Gessa, pleading for help because rescuing his mother is more complicated than expected. Faced with this situation, our boy managed to talk to God to reproach him for not allowing him to go to Bagariot, because otherwise, he would regret it, questioning whether his intentions were for him to truly regret his decisions, no matter what he chose to do. But God assured him he never had bad intentions when giving him advice, as before receiving the letter, he didn't regret not going to Bagariot years ago. Still, the protagonist scolded him for deceiving him all this time. The God-man, hearing him a bit angry, assured him that this wasn't true, and even gave him the same advice, not to approach the Vegarit continent, or he would regret it. Finally, realizing the protagonist was not satisfied with the advice, he warned him it would take a year to go to Begarid and another year to return, meaning he would miss majestic moments with his wife and baby. Seeing him this way, Rudius began to understand why God advised him not to leave, even though his family needed help. In the end, before leaving, God recommended that during the next mating season, he accept to have relations with Linnea or Persena, as this would bless him with immense happiness. Clearly, this idea did not sit well with our boy, who woke up scared, worrying his wife, who was stunned to hear him say he wouldn't go to the Vegarit continent, despite receiving a letter asking for help. In the following days, the protagonist sought advice from his friends, who had different views on what he should do. However, what marked the course of his life the most was seeing Norm cry, pleading for him to travel to help her parents, as she wasn't strong enough to do it herself. Her tears made Rudius realize he was the only one strong enough to save her parents, even if it meant leaving his future family behind. Because of this, Norm, very happy with his decision, promised to do her best to get along with him so they could both take care of Sylphie and the baby on the way. So, with a new plan in place, Rudy met with Alina Liz to update her on the situation. She, a bit surprised, warned him that he should really stay with his wife, but if he truly wants to help his father, she'll join him on the trip. They then began discussing the best route to reach Begarid as quickly as possible. Thanks to this, Inalis pointed out that they could likely make the round trip in just 16 months, which amazed Rudy, who was glad it would take less time than he expected. Now that they decided their next steps, it was time for the hardest part, saying goodbye to their friends, as it would take at least 2 years to return depending on the challenges they faced. However, when Rudy said goodbye to Silent, he was surprised to learn that 2 years without her experiments would be too long. For that reason, she gave him a book containing a map of the transfer circles scattered around the world, allowing him to travel faster. Rudy, astonished, scolded her for lying about forgetting where the transfer circles were. Still, he thanked her, as her help meant he would only take a month to reach Vegarit. In the end, before parting, Silent warned him to keep the locations of the circles a secret because they are forbidden, and the government will eliminate anyone who finds them. Later, Rudy returned home to deliver the tough news to his wife, who, instead of getting angry, promised to take care of the house until he returned. The next day, Rudy continued saying goodbye to everyone he knew, and in the afternoon, he set off for Vegarit with Lina Lise, who, before leaving, received an amazing proposal from Cliff to marry her when he returns. A week later, we see that after a long journey, Rudy and his companion found the hidden stone in the forest that protects the ruin with the transfer circle. Following Silent's instructions, they managed to deactivate the seal hiding the place and used the transfer circle to get closer to their destination, a desert in the continent of Vegarit. However, despite confirming it worked, they decided it was best to spend the night in the ruins to avoid the dangerous desert at night. The next day, they began their journey across the hot sands of the desert, which, unbeknownst to them, would bring many problems just hours later, as during the night, Rudy started to hallucinate and almost fell prey to a succubus. Luckily for him, his companion was in better shape and saved him just in time. For the following days, they continued traveling through the desert, facing various beasts along the way. They even found a small bazaar where they replenished their strength with delicious food. Finally, after much walking, they reached the desert city of Rapham. Upon arrival, Rudy told the Analysts that the first thing they needed to do was find his father. For that reason, his friends suggested looking for information at the guild. To their surprise, upon entering the guild, they ran into their old friend, Gessa, who is Paul's right-hand man. Without wasting time, Rudy asked him to take him to his father as soon as possible. However, the meeting was not as rewarding as he expected, as his father received him in terrible condition. He even apologized on his knees, claiming he was a poor failure who couldn't save his beloved as promised. Rudy, shocked by the situation, urged his father to relax and leave everything to him. He also told him he could trust him, as he had matured so much that he would soon have a child. Paul, in tears, congratulated him on this great news and apologized once more for being a useless father. Then, Paul apologized to Aline Lise, as their last meeting had not ended well. She, still a bit upset, accepted his apologies and then updated him that she now has a husband, a loving guy named Cliff. Clearly, Paul couldn't believe someone would be crazy enough to marry someone like her, but Rudy, furious at his father's words, demanded he apologize since Cliff is a great friend he admires. As a result, his father had no choice but to retract his words and apologize again to Alenalis. Next, he informed them about Senet's situation, who is trapped in a labyrinth a day's journey north of their position, but unfortunately, they have no more information than that, meaning they don't know how long she has been there or if her life is in danger. Additionally, Paul told them that after a year, 4 expert explorers have not even reached the halfway point of the labyrinth, which is quite disappointing. However, this was not the worst news, as Rudy's father revealed that a month ago, Rock fell into a trap in the labyrinth after stepping on a transfer circle and disappeared. As you can imagine, this news affected Rudy greatly, who, upon hearing it, was overwhelmed with thoughts because no one knows what happened to his teacher. But after being calmed down by him and Nelise, Rudy came back to himself and asked Paul about the labyrinth where his mother is trapped. He told him it's one of the worst in the area, being rank S, and as if that weren't dangerous enough, it's known as the transfer labyrinth. Upon hearing this, Rudy, surprised, mentioned that he just happens to have a book with the account of an adventurer who reached the depths of that labyrinth and thinks it might be useful. To everyone's surprise, after Gessa checked it, they found the book was more useful than they thought, as it contained all the information they needed to proceed. A few days later, we see the whole group preparing to enter the dangerous rank S labyrinth. There, Paul warned his son to stick to the plan laid out by the team, or else they would all be in danger. Next, we can see that, thanks to Rudy's map, they quickly reached the level where they lost Roxy. Because of this, they began the difficult task of finding their teacher. To everyone's surprise, it took our boy only about 5 minutes to find his beloved Roxy, who was on the brink of death after exhausting her mana, fighting off a huge number of monsters that kept teleporting to her position. As you can imagine, Roxy was stunned to see her apprentice arrive just in time to save her life when she had lost all hope. The protagonist, upon seeing her, rushed to give her a strong hug, but Roxy immediately pushed him away, insisting that it was best for him to keep his distance, since a month in the labyrinth left her with a bad vibe. Even though Rudius assured her it didn't matter, she preferred to stick to her stance. Still, she thanked him for saving her life and left him speechless when she introduced herself as if she didn't know him. Roxy, realizing they seemed to know each other, apologized for not being able to remember him. This completely threw our boy off, leaving him on the verge of a psychotic breakdown upon discovering that his beloved teacher didn't even remember him. A few minutes later, after reminding Roxy who the hell he was, the protagonist took her to the rest of the group, who decided to return to the city so she could rest properly. Several days later, after much preparation, the whole group returned to the labyrinth with the goal of finding the teleportation circle that would take them to level 4. During the adventure, we see the group grow even stronger with Roxy's return, who took the opportunity during breaks to bond more closely with Rudius, even suggesting they explore an easier labyrinth together. Hours later, they continued investigating and facing monsters until they found the coveted circle that leads to level 4. After finding it, they decided to explore the area a bit before returning to the city for a well-deserved break. They encountered some pretty strong enemies, but thanks to the 2 mages on the team, things became much easier for everyone. Over the next few days, the group visited the city to restock supplies and buy everything they needed to tackle the next levels of the labyrinth. Because of this, we saw they easily passed through level 4 and reached the depths of level 5, the furthest point the writer of Rudius's book had reached. From this moment on, everything will be new for them, and they'll have to manage without the help of the book. Because of this, the protagonist took charge of the team, as they found 2 identical teleportation circles, and according to the book, only one is correct. In light of this, our boy asked his teammates to give him time to figure out which one they should choose. A few hours later, Rudius noticed that the room was identical to the rune one where he had arrived at the Vegarit Desert, so he quickly asked Gessa to thoroughly investigate the area for hidden stairs. Although his friend was a bit surprised by the order, he decided to comply. Thanks to this, the protagonist earned everyone's praise, as they managed to find the right path without anyone falling into a trap. Next, we see the situation become very tense, because the group is about to face the unknown, making them doubt whether it would be wise to keep advancing without returning to the city for more resources. But Paul, as the group leader, encouraged his friends and assured them that nothing bad would happen since they had the support of Rudius and Roxy. However, he was sorely mistaken because, after using the teleportation circle, they were taken to the Labyrinth's Guardian, a legendary Hydra that some had never even seen. Although Paul didn't care much about that, as he noticed his beloved Zenith, behind the fearsome monster. He rushed toward it without considering how dangerous it would be. In this situation, his teammates began to do what they could to keep him safe, even after he ruined all the group's plans. Unfortunately for him, despite everyone giving their all, both Roxy and the protagonist suggested that it would be best to retreat, since Lidra, besides being able to repel magic, had regeneration abilities. But Paul, blinded by the desire to fulfill his promise and save his beloved, charged at the monster again, trusting he could take it down this time. Because of this, Guess had to throw smoke grenades to stop him before it was too late. Later, after reaching the magic circle, they all returned to the previous level. There, the protagonist scolded his father for losing his mind, although he, claiming to be calmer now, confessed that he had no doubt the woman trapped behind the Hydra was Zenith. Then, seeing that his son was too calm, he started to argue with him, because he couldn't understand how he could remain so composed after just finding his mother. Our boy, far from causing problems, asked him to calm down and analyze the situation, since they didn't even know if Zenith was still alive. Clearly, his words only made his father angrier, prompting Gessa to intervene to separate them. Next, the group began to debate their next steps. Thanks to this, they identified their enemy as a Manatita Hydra, a powerful demonic dragon that absorbs mana and is only mentioned in legends. But despite the daunting outlook, Rudius, based on a myth from his world, suggested they try burning the monster's wounds to prevent regeneration, and since no one had a better idea, they decided to follow the plan proposed by the protagonist. Therefore, after some encouraging words from Paul, they all returned to the Hydra's room. Minutes later, after a risky attempt, they discovered that the plan would indeed work. Because of this, everyone did their best to stick to the plan and eliminate as many of the monster's heads as possible. However, the Hydra was smarter than they thought, as it figured out their plan and began to bite its own body to remove the burned parts. In response, Helen Alice did everything possible to stop it, and froze all the areas the monster was trying to eliminate. But the Hydra, far from doing nothing, prepared a powerful breath attack to rid itself of the ice on its body. Rudius, noticing this, called all his teammates to gather around him, and then conjured a powerful water barrier to block the fire launched by their enemy. After preventing everyone from getting roasted, the group charged once more at the remaining heads of the Hydra. However, after eliminating 2 of the 3 remaining heads, Rudius lost focus, thinking the job was done. This caused his father to have to save him by taking the attack meant for him. Our boy, blinded by rage, stabbed his hand into the Hydra's eye, allowing Rock to take off the last head, though he lost his left hand. Still, instead of feeling defeated, he felt joy for defeating the legendary foe. But when he celebrated, he discovered the terrible news. His father was crushed by the Hydra's attack. Suddenly, as he tried to process it all, the crystal containing his mother shattered, setting her free. Next, we see the group return home in silence, unable to comprehend that their leader and friend has just died. As you can imagine, the news shattered the hearts of their companions waiting in the city. Nevertheless, Lily took charge and assured Rudius she would handle everything while he took a break. The next day, we see everyone back in the labyrinth to say goodbye to Paul and give him eternal rest. Days later, Zenith finally woke up, but it wasn't what the protagonist expected. As soon as he opened his eyes, his mother seemed to have suffered some issue, as she couldn't even speak. As you can imagine, this deeply affected Rudius, who, overwhelmed with sadness, began to remember how poorly he treated his parents in the other world, caring so little that he didn't even attend their funerals. Then, we see the protagonist lamenting that his father should still be alive to protect Norm and Aisha, not losing his life to a mere imposter like him. Suddenly, while Rudius cried over his father's poor decision, Roxy burst into his room to comfort him. However, it wasn't a friendly comfort. Instead, his teacher, claiming she wanted to share his sadness, let her basest desires out, and gave the protagonist a night of passionate love. The next day, Rudius woke up feeling embarrassed about what happened last night. Still, they both pretended nothing happened. But, after agreeing that he needed to move on with his life since his family was waiting for him, they were surprised by him and Nalise when Rax tried to leave the room unnoticed. In this situation, our boy's teacher assures him he can go see his mother, as she needs to talk to Elenalice alone. Later, we see that upon arriving at his mother's room, Rudius feels great sadness because she can't even eat by herself. Therefore, Lilia takes care of feeding her. Still, like Roxy, the redhead pleads with him not to worry about his mother and to continue with his life, as she is sure that's what Paul would have wanted. For that reason, she tells him to fulfill his duties, just as she will, respecting his father's wishes. Hearing this, Rudius believes it's time to return home, which means crossing a vast desert to reach the transfer circle. However, instead of being intimidated, he took his whole family with him. Finally, after a few days of travel, the protagonist's group returned north in the blink of an eye, quite literally, as Rudius had them cover their eyes so they wouldn't see the circle's location, just as he promised Silent. Next, they continued their journey to our boy's home, but when night fell, they had to set up a small camp. During the night, while Rudius and Alanali stood guard, she, aware of his feelings for his teacher, assures him there's nothing wrong with loving two people. Therefore, she advises him to marry Roxy, knowing how much he cares for her. Our boy, very surprised, asks if she's serious, to which she replies yes, as she wants her friend to be happy, and now that she's found him in a complicated situation, she's thinking of stepping aside. Clearly, these words resonated in the protagonist's mind, who doesn't think it's a good idea, since he criticized his father for marrying two women, and now he's planning to do the same. However, Elinalise asks if he remembers how sad his mother was when Paul married Lilia. He confesses that was only at first, but later they shared many joyful moments. Therefore, Elinalise assures him that's normal, and reveals she's sure he can love two women, just like Paul did. And even though Rudius starts to consider the idea, he tells her he's not sure Roxy and Sylphie will accept his selfishness, but Elinalise tells him not to overthink it, and just ask Roxy right now. After being called by her friend Roxy, a bit embarrassed, presented herself to Roxy, who, after a few roundabout words, confessed that she loves him and asked if he wants to become a Grey Rat. She, blushing from the protagonist's words, tells him that before answering, she wants him to ask his spy, and only then will she give her answer. The next day, we see that before reaching the city, Rudius recalled Hitogami's words and realized that the regret he warned about might be related to his wife. Therefore, complaining about wasting time, he starts running home to check that everything is okay. Upon arrival, he found a completely empty house. Because of this, he began to have an anxiety attack that made it hard for him to breathe. However, suddenly, Aisha came out of her room and welcomed him home while trying to figure out what happened to his hand. But our boy, still very worried, asks where North and Sylphie are. Suddenly, when she explains that North was at school, Sylphie arrived and tried to calm her husband, as he was visibly upset about something, assuring him that everything was fine, meaning he had nothing to worry about. Then, while Rudius sighed in relief that everyone was okay, she hugged him to bring him even more calm. A few hours later, after the rest of the group arrived, Aisha brought North home. Therefore, with everyone gathered, the protagonist dropped the terrible news that Paul had died, placing his belongings on the tables. North, tormented by the news, demanded how that could happen if he was by his side, to which her brother, very saddened, replied that it was because he wasn't up to the situation, and although North planned to continue blaming him for their father's death, seeing he lost an arm, she decided to be silent. Next, Rudius detailed everything that happened in the last few months. As you can imagine, it was tough news for everyone, especially for Nair, who seeks comfort, thinking that if even his brother couldn't save Paul, no one could prevent his death. Finally, when things calmed down a bit, Rudius told his family that Lilia and Zenit would be living with them, as their mother would need special care until she recovers. So, Rudy said goodbye, thanking them for all their help. However, after they left, he revealed to his wife that there was something important they needed to discuss, and even though he hadn't said anything yet, just looking at Roxy made him suspect what the conversation would be about. Then, in front of the girls, Rudius confessed to his wife that he had been unfaithful and begged her to forgive him for not keeping his promise. But while Sylphie tried to find the words to respond, Narn angrily scolded her brother for being an idiot, as all this time Sylph had been very worried about him and went through a tough pregnancy alone, without any help from him. She then confessed that she tried not to blame him for their father's death, even losing her left hand. However, she can't understand how, Despite that, he had time to sleep with another. He, annoyed by his sister's words, assured her that everything he went through was not easy at all. He even revealed that Roxy sacrificed her feelings to save him when he was at his lowest. Norm, angry at his silly excuses, pointed out that if Sylphie could have been by his side, she would have saved him too. Next, he started attacking Roxy for getting involved with a family expecting a baby. Rudius, furious, demanded his sister not to cross the line as the idea of marriage was his alone, and even told her that Roxy tried to step back. Still, she told him to just keep quiet. Then he attacked Roxy again, who, embarrassed, decided to leave after apologizing to the whole family. But before she could leave the house, Sylphie stopped her and showed how mature she was, confessing that she knew sooner or later her husband would bring another woman because he's a pervert. She also assured her that seeing how he looks at her reminded her of herself. For that reason, and knowing how much Rudius admires her, she revealed that she was willing to accept her into the family. Roxy, upon hearing this, burst into tears and thanked her for being a great woman who accepted her husband's decision. Thanks to this, Rudy continued his life as if nothing happened, surrounded by his big family. But a month later, his long-awaited daughter was born, which he held for the first time with great emotion. Several days later, Rudy visited his father's grave to tell him he finally became a dad, revealing that he decided to name her Lucy Greyrat. He also thanked him again for saving his life. Finally, he informed him that despite all the criticism, he ended up being just like him, as he now has 2 wives, and after apologizing for not being a good son, he promised that next time he visits, he'll bring his whole family. But that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I did. Once the 3rd season comes out, I'll get right to work on the next summary. And well, with nothing more to say, I'm Keto, and I'll see you next time.